Hi, Rob. Hi, Rob. Hi, Rob.
I know my microphone was working before, but now we've got more people here. Is it still working?
Yeah, you're still working, Kate.
Oh, good.
Rob, I don't think you've got a microphone set. And when just enter just with your video and not with a microphone.
I know my microphone was working before, but now we've got more people here. Is it still working?
Yeah, you're still working, Kate.
Oh, good.
Rob, I don't think you've got a microphone.
Kevin, is that the YouTube feed playing back? Are you playing the YouTube feed on your computer?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
Can you mute it?
I have. You get those weird things going on, don't you?
I dislike intensely the sound of my own voice.
Right, okay.
Is that the YouTube feed playing back? Are you playing the YouTube feed on your computer?
Right, there we go. That seems to be working. Right.
Robert said he's not a panelist, and I think he needs to be a panelist to speak. And I did just hear my YouTube feed again.
That's a different Robert, I think.
Oh, sorry. I'll stop now.
Right. Okay, so who's there? Turn it off totally.
Robert, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me? Sorry, I was just playing around.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, no, that's fine.
Sorry.
Playing around.
Great. Stop playing.
Right, how many attendees have we got? Can't see at the moment.
174.
Mhm.
I don't think we've got Mina yet, have we?
Oh, she'll be in a meeting, so she'll come through
Okay.
later.
And
Right.
Emma is the other person.
Right. Oh. That's very strange. Oh. Hmm. Hmm. Anyway, Rob, are you ready to go? Is that?
I think so.
Ah,
Don't
good,
need
good. Right. I'm still trying to work out this YouTube thing. It's a bit of a shame. Well, doesn't work as I'd hoped.
Maybe a second moderator could record directly to their machines and that could be shared later, an edited version. So you've got a second recording backup.
No, we're already recording on, what's it called? Zoom.
Yeah, all right, well then you're covered, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to get it to play embedded. Now, for some reason, it's not doing that. Oh, well.
FJ Rubio says YouTube is working.
Yeah, you can actually view it. You can go there and you can actually see it, but you can't embed it. So you can't play as embedded. So let's. Oh, it's 1:30. Oh, well, never mind. Give me a second, and I'll. There's me trying to be clever, eh? Okay. Right, that'll have to do. Right. Let's get down to business, shall we? Right, so apparently we've got 377 participants. Hello, everybody. I see there's some people putting things in the chat. Fantastic. Well, anyway, many thanks for coming. Welcome to the Teaching and Learning Mathematics Online workshop. First of all, let me introduce the organisers. I'm Kevin Houston. I'm a lecturer at the University of Leeds. I'm also the Education Secretary of the London Mathematical Society, and I'm a co-founder of Talking Maths in Public. So I'll just hand over to my co-organiser, Michael, and he can introduce himself.
Thanks, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Michael Grove. I'm from School of Maths at University of Birmingham, but I'm the Honorary Secretary with responsibility for education for the Institute of Maths and its applications. And along with Kevin, I'm one of the co-organisers of this. I'll pass you on to our next co-organiser, which is Rachel.
Hi everybody, it's great to see so many people here. Thank you very much for turning up. I'm Rachel Hilliam. I'm a lecturer in statistics at the Open University, and I'm also on the committee for teaching statistics at the Royal Statistical Society. So I hope everybody has a really great afternoon, and we hope to see you all back tomorrow as well. And I'm going to pass you back to our host for the afternoon, Kevin.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Right, so we're doing this on Zoom webinars rather than Zoom meeting because we had a lot of people signing up. The last time I checked, it was 930 people registered. So we were expecting maybe half of that to turn up because that's what usually happens. You know, people have to turn up can only turn up at certain times. So it's quite good to see so many people. With Zoom webinars, what it means is that attendees are stopped from sharing video unless they're promoted to a panelist, and their audio is turned off. So if you're wondering why you can't turn on your video or audio, that's the reason for it. Now we are recording this. We're recording this and it's being live streamed on YouTube. There's about a 30-second delay. And the stream is accessible on the Teaching and Learning Maths Online webpage. It's not quite live streaming the way I want it, but there is a link there if you need it. And if you don't wish to be identified, then please change your username now. Right, so we've got people from all around the world, I noticed, in the registrations. So United States, Brazil, France, Germany, Netherlands, Australia, Pakistan. We've got some people from Kenya as well. So hello to everybody from around the world. So the main thing is, why are we here today? Well, due to COVID-19, many universities are moving to online teaching this next year. And it's something that many of us don't really have any choice about. So it's something that universities and colleges are asking us to do. So the aim of this workshop is to help maths and statistics lecturers adapt to this situation. And we'd like to give sort of like helpful advice to help you in what's probably going to be the most stressful teaching year that many of us can remember. So we're not going to discuss or take any positions on the long-term status of online teaching within higher education, because I know some people will be feeling, well, we've got to be careful about this, because if I put all my lectures online, then the university will be able to sack me because it's got all the videos. So we're not taking any sort of position on that. We're trying to give practical advice, and maybe in a later event we can kind of discuss this sort of thing. So we've got 12 speakers, 6 each day, and the speakers are experts in some aspect of online learning. So this may be the expertise gathered from years of experience in the online teaching space, or it may be the experience of rapidly having to develop some teaching course online within space of a few months and get it all up and running and assessment all sorted out and everything. Okay. Each speaker is going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then there will be a 5 minutes Q&A. If you wish to ask a question, then please please use the Q&A button. Now, what I forgot to do while I was saying this was I forgot to show you the. Hopefully, you can see that now. Show you our various slides. So there's the slides of the speakers. Now you may see on the screen now, you should be able to see the a little slide saying where to find the Q&A button and where to find the chat. So the Q&A is the way we're going to run the questions and answers. So if you want to ask a question of the presenter, use that. You can say anything you like in the chat as long as it's appropriate and not offensive. Well, what we'll do is in the Q&A, once the presenter is finished, I or somebody else will read out a question, pick some questions, pose it to the presenter so that we've got a recording of what the question was, and so you can hear it. And hopefully the Q&A should display the person's question at the same time, as long as I remember to hit the right button. And then the question will be answered. and then the question will be stored later on, and you can see which questions have been answered. If there's not enough time to answer your question, then it may be possible that the speaker can answer your question by typing the answer after the presentation. Okay, so that's the way we're going to run that. If you want to make comments, please make comments in the chat. Somebody will be monitoring that. If you put comments on YouTube, then unfortunately we're not going to be able to keep an eye on that because it's probably going to be complicated enough already. But anyway, so yeah, please put them on the chat here, or and questions in the Q&A box. Okay, so we're not really going to be using the raise hand facility either, because I think that would just be a bit too confusing doing that. Okay, so I guess we're close enough to the time now that hang on, I'll just see that there already seem to be some questions, so maybe I'll check and see what questions we got so far. Are the slides available? Are the slides available now? We don't have the slides available now. We will make them available later. Oh, I should do this correctly, shouldn't I? There we go. You should be able to see that now. You should be able to see the question. And a reminder, you can actually select anonymous for this if you want to pose questions anonymously. And if you don't want your name mentioned, then change your username or use anonymous. Okay, are the slides available? Okay, that's gone. Right. The next one, anonymous attendee. So hello from Sussex. Will you also post the text from the Q&A and chat on your website afterwards? Well, I'll try to. I'll try and the chat. I think the chat probably would need some editing. It usually does when I've done this before. And somebody else's, oh, that one's a similar sort of question, but we'll deal with that. How a Q&A is stored via Zoom. Well, we'll sort that out. Don't worry. Right. Okay. So we're up to 476 participants. Look to me like attendee. Oh, the number of attendees just, we've lost somebody already. That's off to a good start. Right. Anyhow, I think that we should just press on. We've got about, well, no, it's time now. So need to get rid of my Q&A thing, is in the way. Right, I hope that Rob is ready to go and is ready to share his screen with you. So Robert Wilson is a senior lecturer at the School of Maths, Cardiff University, and is in fact an advanced HE National Teaching Fellow. He was the Dean for Education Innovation, and he's editor of, oops, that's, and my script's gone when he did that. That's one of the problems with Zoom, isn't it? So yeah, so he's interrupted the introduction. So he's the editor of Connections, and his talk will be Engaging Students in Online Mathematics Learning. Take it away, please, Rob.
Okay, thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr, prynawn da. Good afternoon. I want to start by saying thank you very much to the organisers for this event, really. It's really, I think it's really timely, and I think lots of interesting things, and I hope that my own contribution is helpful. I am going to talk about online learning, despite the picture that you see before you, and I thought it was still useful to have a kind of throwback of what things used to be like, although everything seems a little bit of a distant memory at the moment. So my talk itself, I want to start with a little bit of context. My experience in terms of online teaching is restricted to post-lockdown. So prior to lockdown, I had no experience in online teaching whatsoever. So my discussions today are going to be based on two lecture courses or two modules that I run for just under half a semester since lockdown. Predominantly, I'm going to focus on what I refer to as a standard lecture-based module. The other module that I'm involved in is a very different model. I think the ideas I'm going to talk about will kind of resonate in those areas, but I'm predominantly thinking of the kind of standard lecture-based module. through these discussions at least. And that's for a year 2, level 5 undergraduate mathematics module with 173 students registered. I'm going to focus on the ideas rather than the technology, but just to note that we use Blackboard at our institution. So in terms of what I used, it was the Blackboard learning system and Blackboard Collaborate within that. Okay. And finally, what I've tried to do is use the well-known primary model of reflection, and that's 2 stars and a wish. So in other words, 2 things that I think I've learned during this process, and 1 idea which definitely needs further work. So the first star, the first thing that I'd like to highlight is structure. And so if you like, part of the scaffolding to support the students' learning. Now, what became apparent as we moved to remote learning is that it was natural to remind students, if you like, of what was coming up, certainly more than what I would have done for typical kind of lectures. So typically on a weekly basis, maybe reminding students about sessions that were happening, and also highlighting resources, additional resources that were made available. Now, for 2 things here, obviously people's routines were all over the place, and I know mine are and still are. So it was certainly helping me highlight those things, but also for the students. And I think there was a sense of anxiety that, or the perception of removing something by not having face-to-face, despite the contact sessions or the virtual contact sessions happening. Having additional resources was in some way to kind of highlight or to alleviate some of that anxiety, perhaps. But what I realized when looking back at this, 1, students certainly appreciated it. Simple comments from students about the reminders being helpful, and pointing to the resources being particularly helpful. So it made me think that this is something I'd like to adapt. So what am I looking to do in the future? And I'd like to really extend this to highlight the kind of expectations involved around the learning, to try and engage students and help students understand what the requirements are before a contact session, during, and potentially after. So something like this is what I'm planning on kind of extending to as we look forward to next semester. It may change the word essentially, as well as thinking about what activities take place, trying to highlight the structure that's involved, the time commitment that is involved for each of the different learning activities, and being realistic around that. So for example, highlighting, okay, before a session, you need to be thinking about doing this, and this is how long it should take you. And then highlighting what perhaps will happen during a session, what kind of activities will take place. I think we spent more and more time over the last few years highlighting expectations. And I see this perhaps as a bit of an opportunity to really underpin some of that. The other thing that I recognize through this is that the way in which the Learning Central module that I have or Blackboard, sorry, module is structured, is quite disjoint. So it would have, for example, notes in one area, exercises in another area, additional resources, if you want to call it that, in another area. And what this is looking to do perhaps is to integrate those better, so that students can see what is relevant according to different topics within the module. And I think this is helping with that particular structure. My second idea, if you like, was I've called reuse, not replicate, and I've thought about this quite a bit. So what essentially do I mean? I mean, it's an opportunity to really think about what we're trying to do or trying to achieve from particular learning activities, not simply replicating that activity. So I'll come back to the lecture recordings in a second. But what I did during the contact session, the virtual contact sessions, was somewhat reflective of what I would do in a lecture. I would suggest my lecture style isn't completely traditional. It's not flipped learning. I'd say it's tilted, somewhere in between. So part of what I did using Blackboard Collaborate would be to annotate some existing slides and to obviously comment on them. Now, I found that as I improved with that, simply just writing on a tablet and highlighting what area that I was talking about improved, I still felt it was lacking in some way. There was certainly a broader engagement using the chat, so a broader students' engagement with asking some questions, but still not huge. So it started making me think about, well, what is it I really want to get from that? In a lecture, I wouldn't spend 50 minutes doing that. But I still perhaps felt that those sessions online weren't as engaging and perhaps were longer or were taking longer than I would typically do in a lecture. So it made me think about how to use recordings. And what I intend to do is to really focus some of those key ideas, those ideas of introducing particular topics, perhaps highlighting some key things, and then trying to utilize the contact time to actually focus on review and doing more. So it's reusing those ideas, not necessarily replicating them. So that made me think about the lecture recordings. Now, when we went to remote learning, I made available all the lecture recordings from the previous year, which were on the topics, obviously, that wouldn't be done in the same way this academic year. And I decided to have a look at engagement with that. And the top graph is last academic year for the same module, and the bottom graph is this academic year. Despite the change in scale, there is virtually identical kind of engagement in terms of download and time spent on the videos, with the natural peak a couple of days before the exam. I was certainly expecting the material after we went into lockdown to be viewed more at that point. And in fact, looking at those specific classes, they are amongst the lowest viewed recordings this academic year. So again, I think there's something there that there is some engagement, as you can see from the usage, even though that hasn't particularly changed from one year to the next. So there is use to these things, but how they are being used, I think, needs to be more focused. So that's, again, where I'm looking perhaps to redo some of the videos, and also think about then using the virtual contact time accordingly to kind of reflect on some of that. The one area that did work particularly well, I felt, which is peer instruction. Now, this is something that I have been doing previously, and I felt it certainly worked using in the online environment really well. So the opportunity to ask relatively straightforward questions. I'm a fan of true or false because it gets students thinking. It's based on the idea from primary, if you like, of think, pair, share. You can ask students to do things individually. You can ask them to vote, which can be set up really easy using a simple poll in seconds in Collaborate. You can send students into breakout rooms to discuss those ideas and then come back and vote again. And the level of feedback it provides you as an educator, as well as the students, I think is invaluable. So this is certainly something that I would recommend people to think about and how to utilize it, not to overdo it, but to think about how such questions can be used to stimulate some of that discussion, because that's the thing that I was really trying to do in the kind of face-to-face contact as well. My wish, on the other hand, is how to kind of extend that discussion beyond the contact. I did use the discussion board. I encourage use of the discussion board in learning in Blackboard. I created threads according to different topics. I tried to instigate some discussion. I used student emails where they were asking questions as the basis of some of that, and got virtually no response. So I'm really interested over the next couple of days to see if anyone has any ideas around kind of developing this. So I actually returned to simply replying to the student emails. Now, the big change that I noticed in this case was that a number of students, not all, there were still some students sending relatively low-level queries through via email, but a number of students were sending me work that they had completed. So pictures, and then sending it through saying, could you comment on what I've done here? Now that for me is engagement. That for me is demonstrating the students have tried something. And that's the thing that I'd really like to capture. So how to get students perhaps to review each other's material, feel free to share each other's material in the first place, and perhaps to comment and critique each other's. That's something that I'd like to do more of, and I'd be particularly interested in hearing other people's views on. Now, we were asked to kind of think about a kind of a take home, and as part of my own learning, I signed up to a Future Learn program about how to teach online, which I think was very helpful. And there was one item that resonated quite strongly with me quite early on in that I wanted to share. And this idea that it's not our responsibility to try and fix everything as we move, or as we're kind of looking to work within this slightly different environment. We do have a responsibility to kind of design and to consider how we can support our students as effectively as we can. But there were issues, in my opinion, with engagement previously in the standard approach. And I don't think we're going to address all of those things now. Students have a responsibility to develop that engagement as well, as do we in trying to encourage it. So I've highlighted a couple of other resources there that perhaps people might find useful. And I will stop there. So hopefully I'm on time.
Sorry, I just needed to unmute my audio there. Well, thank you very much. I believe we can still do reactions to this. I think people can still clap on this. I can't see it on my thing, but I don't know. Anyway, we can still go like that. Thank you very much. Right, okay. During your talk, I had to ensure some technical details, so I missed part of it. So if I ask any questions which you've already answered, then my apologies. So there was one which I thought was quite interesting. So I'll anonymous attendee, you seem to be assuming that all students are operating in the same time zone and therefore can respond live to quizzes. However, on account of the pandemic, this is not a given for the new academic year. Any suggestions?
That is a very good point. Predominantly, our own cohort is relatively uniform. We don't have huge amounts of international students, first of all. However, in this scenario, or coming scenario, we are going to have to think about that. And all the sessions will themselves be recorded anyway. And what I was trying to think on timetabling could alleviate some of these. And whatever plan we have will have to be linked, obviously, to timetables and everything else. But the ideas themselves and the structure behind the sessions themselves, I would hope could still allow for some students, with whatever time zone they're in, to support their self-directed learning as well. So it doesn't address people from all corners of the globe. I appreciate that. So we do have to think about what kind of timing and what might be possible. How else we do it, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, thanks. We'll try this one. Sarah and Giuseppe saying, "Hi Robert, thanks for sharing. I'm keen to hear how you gave," and how is capitalized, "I'm keen to hear how you gave feedback to students during online sessions." Can you perhaps say something on that in a couple of minutes or within a minute or so?
So first of all, one thing I did was to ask students to send me questions in advance. So I was able to highlight certain topics, for example. I could, where necessary, talk about quite specific problems, specific exercises. So that could be going through part of an exercise, for example, and doing that live. So that was one way that that was done. Because students were sending me their individual attempts at problems as well, I could provide specific commentary to that individual student. But what I was also doing is using those as a basis for also providing some more general feedback in the contact sessions themselves. So there was a mix, if you like, between myself actually going through some examples live, if you like, although my writing on a tablet was still needs some work, I think it's fair to say. In addition to, like I said, being able to highlight some general points from the kinds of queries that I was getting individually.
Right, okay, thanks. On that last bit, maybe we've got a minute or so. So Gemma Shipton says, "Hi, thanks for a great talk. I'd like to ask if you think that the efforts you went to encourage online discussion were useful to students, even though they didn't engage. Maybe they were reading but not responding." I think that's something we worry about. What are your thoughts on that in maybe under a minute?
I had thought about that actually, because one thing that is difficult to know is if they are reading it. With the discussion board I was using, at least, it doesn't record to say who's viewed it very well. So that is something that could happen. I would still like to encourage further direct engagement from the students, so that again, how to get the norm being it's not all my responsibility to provide the feedback. I certainly have a responsibility. I'm not questioning that, but I think there are huge benefits to the students actually reviewing each other's ideas and then questioning them as well. And I'm still not sure how to really capture that. But that doesn't mean to say that there wasn't some benefit to them actually seeing my responses to the questions. Right.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for your talk. I don't know if people can applaud. I should have checked this beforehand, but there might still be the button on the webinar version. Oh, somebody, maybe they are. Right, so thank you very much. Now, next up, we're going to move swiftly along here. And next up, we've got Katie Shiko. Katie is a senior lecturer and staff tutor at Maths and Stats at the Open University. She's also the CEO of Maths World UK, who aim to set up the UK's first mathematics discovery centre. Anyhow, Katie will be telling us about teaching mathematics through video recordings. So take it away, Katie.
Hello everyone. Hiya. Can everyone still hear me? Give me a thumbs up from the organiser. You can hear me still. Great. Fantastic. Thanks to the organisers. It's really great to be here, and I hope you get something out of all of the sessions. So as Kevin said, I work at the Open University, and because we've got people from around the world, I'll just briefly describe what the Open University does and how it works. So we are a correspondence university. We're not a face-to-face university anyway. So what you're doing now, all of a sudden, that's how we work anyway. So there is a lot that we've learned over the years, and I'll try and pull out, enough points for you to be able to remember them and for them to be useful. So I'm going to focus on video because you've moved from face-to-face, so you might want to incorporate some video, but there's lots of other methods you'll want to consider, and I'll address that a little bit at the start. But what I wanted to say before I started sharing my screen was, I'll do some of this sharing my screen and talking over slides, and I'll do some of it where you can see me talking. And I just wanted to point that out now so that you can think, is it easier to listen to me when you're looking at me? Or do you find it easier to listen to me when you're looking at the slides I'm explaining? So then you can think, oh, actually, which did I prefer? Which might I carry forward? I'm one of the people who finds it easier to listen to someone when I can see their face, but you might just be happy to look at the maths. Okay, so I will share my screen a bit because it helps me to remember what I was going to say. So let's pull out this. And then if you can't see it, please let me know. And I want it as a slideshow from the beginning. Okay. Okay, so if you can see my screen, can you see the chat in the screen on top of my slides, or do you just see the slides? Do you want to just give me a, Kevin, could you just say whether you can see just the slides or whether you can see the chat window on top of it?
Just the slides, can't see the chat window, it's fine.
Okay, because I'm keeping an eye on the chat, but I will look away from the chat for most of this because it's quite distracting to try and speak and read at the same time. And that's something you're going to find when you're doing online tutorials. While you're speaking to your students and you're trying to read their feedback, it's a big concentration exercise. So the first thing I wanted to bring your attention to, and this has also come up with the first speaker, is you need to decide what the structure of your teaching is going to be. And with the Open University, the spine of the teaching is the written course materials. So they have basically textbooks, but they are specific prepared textbooks by us. And they have gone through a couple of authors and a few editors and a whole publishing house. So obviously, we invest a lot of time and money in our written course materials because they are the backbone of our teaching. You're going to have to do this in much more quickly, not in the same way, but you might still want to use written course materials as your foundation. So if you've got your lecture notes or if you've got a textbook that the course is based on, that might help you hit the ground running. But whatever you do as the spine of your course, you're going to have to think about that and set the other materials around it. And whatever your core materials are, hand in hand with your core teaching materials is going to be the assessment. And at the Open University, when we are preparing professional development about course writing, they say that you should be thinking about the assessment almost first. What are you going to ask the students? And then you can prepare your teaching materials accordingly. So think about what you want to teach them, but think about what you're going to assess them on. And I guess in the current climate, you're going to have to think how you're going to assess it. So with the Open University, we've got the textbooks, then we've got the assessment. And alongside that, those supporting materials, there are written exercises embedded within the course materials. And then we have offline supplemental extra exercise books as well. We also have online quizzes using Stack, and there's a separate talk on that, so I won't talk about it. But basically, lots and lots of practice. There's tons and tons of practice. Then we use video clips just to model, to illustrate tricky worked examples. So we don't use it for everything. It isn't our spine. We use it for tricky worked examples. And because we know, obviously, learners do learn in different ways, and that's why it's nice to have a range of materials. I am a person who learns better from videos and listening. The assessment is then supported by tutorials, and there's also email support from a tutor. And what I wanted to say, whilst this is a tricky time, there are some bonuses to teaching at a distance, and that is you can prepare your teaching materials in advance, and then you get to allocate which time is for your students and which time is for your other work. So you're not necessarily going to be interrupted. You know, this is the work you'll do for teaching and this is the work you'll do for research, and you can get things done in advance. I think face-to-face universities are going to want to think about peer support. How are you going to replicate that very good peer support your students have had whilst it was face-to-face with what they're going to be doing when they're, you know, away from each other? So the last speaker asked a little bit about how could you get the students to engage with some of this peer support and engage with conversation. We have forums where students can correspond, which the module teams can see. But I've actually found that if the students have their own forum that we can't see, or, you know, we're there as we're lurking, they communicate much better if we're not there. So that might be something to think about. So I know the WhatsApp groups are very busy. I know the Facebook groups are very busy, but I know the Open University sponsored forums, not so much. Okay, so I think what I might do is I might try and take this down now so that I can talk without you seeing the slideshow. Okay, so it's back to my face now, if that's okay. Because I think I prefer to be able to see you at the same time. So is everybody with me so far? You'll find that the first thing that you need to think about is your structure. Now, what are we going to think about in terms of actual videos? When might we use the videos and how might we do them? So we've got 3 main ways that you might do videos. The first way is a screencast, and that is where you are videoing your screen and talking over it. The second way is if you are giving tutorials synchronously, you might record those tutorials. And what I would say is, I would strongly encourage you to record your tutorials, because what we find is students attend our tutorials in certain numbers, and something like 4 times the amount of students who come will actually watch the recording. So recording that tutorial, you know, makes it much, much more valuable. And it's not just that they can watch it more than once. And the last thing you might do is just a straightforward piece to camera. And that just depends on what you're most comfortable with. Right, so how might you do a screencast? I'll go back to sharing so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so can you see? Oh, that's good. I can see everything now. Right, so you should be able to see something that says screencasts, hardware and software. Could you just, and you've now disappeared, video people. Kevin, can you just give me a guess if you can see this?
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah, and is it big enough? Can you see the actual, do you need me to make?
You might want to go slideshow.
I don't. If you can see it, then I don't want to go slideshow because it makes everything else disappear on my screen. Sorry about that, guys. So if you are going to do a screencast, that is, you will want to prepare some slides in advance. And in the Open University, we prefer to then do handwriting on top of those slides and talking at the same time. So explaining it as if they're just looking at your board and they're not looking at you. We favour handwriting over just pre-prepared slides because it moderates your speed, but it also provides a kind of, you're modelling to the student how you want to explain the maths. So there are real, you know, educational good reasons for handwriting on top of the slides. That said, it is really tricky, and I think the first speaker said this, it's quite tricky just getting used to the, you know, the digital pen. All of it's quite tricky, and so you might revert to pre-prepared slides. If you are going to write on your slides, you'll need some sort of writing tool, and I think the cheapest thing you can plug into your computer is the Wacom Bamboo. It just plugs in as a USB. But you might also just be able to do it on your iPad, especially if you've got an iPad that has a pen. You'll also need a good microphone. The one thing students will really complain about is if you have poor audio. So if you were going to spend money on anything, spend money on the microphone. And so the one I've suggested here is a Yeti. That's just one that I've bought myself, which, you know, is used for podcasts and has good quality. It's about £60 or something. Your department should get it. So do concentrate on your audio, get your audio right. It's okay if your screen goes a bit fuzzy, they can make out what's going on, but you should make sure your audio is clear. Then you're going to need some sort of software. And at the Open University, we've used Camtasia, and you can get a kind of a 1 month free trial, but you can also get Jing, which is the free version, and you can then, that's just 5 minutes though. And I just wanted to say, actually, could anybody, I've seen one person in the chat, Julia has said OBS Studio is free. Could you all just pop in the chat anything you've ever used for a screencast? Because I want to be able to save the chat anyway, and it would be nice to share some of your experiences of software and hardware. Okay, so we've got some people, that's good, and you're still awake as well. Right, these are loads of good suggestions. Brilliant. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to carry on talking while those keep scrolling. And somebody did just ask about Zoom, which I will come to next. So if you are going to do a screencast, it does require quite a bit of concentration, actually. It is harder than, it's a lot harder than just teaching, let's face it, because you're focusing on what you're going to say, you're focusing on making your handwriting neat enough and the technology work and controlling the pressing record, pressing stop, pressing pause. And of course, it means that you flush your lines a lot more. So if you are going to do a screencast, some things you want to prepare in advance. So you've got your, whichever slides are prepared, and then you're going to get your handwriting on top of it. It helps if you have something, either you've got a prepared work solution you're working through, or you've got a storyboard or a script. I don't think it's the sort of thing where you can just go in and wing it. Then you're going to be recording as you go along, but I don't think anybody ever really goes through the whole thing and doesn't fluff their lines. So if you are if you're recording a screencast, every few sentences or so, leave a pause between your sentences. So you'll be talking and you'll give a slightly longer, unnatural pause. And then when you fluff your line a little bit later, you just go back to that last point, or you're just carrying on, and then you can snip out back to your last pause. So make some pauses, and then when you fluff your line, just stop, leave another pause, and say the line that you fluffed again, because you'll be able to snip that out. It's quite easy to snip on screencast recording. And just on the screen, I just wanted to put up what your handwritten slides might look like as you go along. Because one thing that I get pulled up on my screencasts is that because I'm explaining the maths verbally, I often then forget to write the maths correctly. You know, I'm not practicing good mathematical communication. So you should be aware that everything you write down should be of the quality you would want the student to give back to you. So do keep that in the mind at the same time. I tend to, if I've explained it, I feel like it's good enough to just jot something down. Well, if you're recording it, and then if you're going to deliver this to hundreds of students, you want it to be at the right quality that they should send back to you. Actually, one of the comments earlier was, could you please tell us how many students you deliver to? So in the OU, all materials go to several hundred students each year, and we use them for many years, which is why we put a lot of upfront effort into it. So make sure you're using good mathematical communication as you would want your students to. Okay, I've realized that I am now not as quick as I planned to be, so I'll start to speed up. Tutorial recordings, it's really useful. Like I say, the students carry on using them. Do you have a software option? Do you have a choice, or has your university chosen something for you? We all have to use Adobe Connect. It has lots of functions. It allows you to share lots of different things, you know, videos, PowerPoints. The students can chat at the same time. But I find it somehow impersonal, and I have found that Zoom is a little bit more immediate. And so to answer one of the queries before, why not use Zoom for a video? I would say it's a tutorial recording if you're using Zoom. Oh, thank you. Right, the clapping noise I was going to come to later. That's a comment in the chat there. Right, so tutorial recordings, please do it. Could everybody now make a comment in the chat as to what software they have used for synchronous tutorials, that is live tutorials. So if you've used something, if you've used Zoom, excepting today, has anybody used anything else? Okay, Microsoft Teams, yeah, Blackboard, great. I've never heard of BlueJeans before. Google Hangouts, great. Okay, thanks for those suggestions. We'll be able to save all this later, so do keep typing them in. Finally, the other kind of videos you might do are pieces to camera. I think I can stop sharing now. Right, so here we are, piece to camera. And why might you choose to do this? It's technologically very simple. You know, all you're going to need is your mobile phone, and I would actually recommend a clip-on mic. You know, they're very cheap. And also you can very cheaply get a tripod. Okay. Piece to camera, very simple, using your phone. You don't need to buy anything extra. So that's the plus side. It's also a lot more personal. I have seen tutorials where the person's just videoed themselves with a board, and I found that much easier to concentrate on and somehow more engaging. But that was just my impression. So it's something you might try. Your university will have been offering in the past media training, and in the future you might want to go for it, but at the minute it's not an option. But the short version for media training, which I can give you now, is when you're talking to your students, either on a screencast or on a piece of camera, smile, okay? It's easier to listen to a smiling face, whether you can see it or not. Slow down a little bit. I realise I've gone very fast, and I'm very sorry for the people from abroad if you could understand me being fast, but 13 minutes was a tall order. And can you make sure that you're not robot voice looking down virtually still, which is something that happens when you turn a camera on someone? Can you be animated? Can you move? Can you be moving your body and your hands so that actually people have something to look at and it's not painfully dull? The bad thing is it's harder to edit. So once you fluff your line on a piece to camera, because we all fluff our lines, you have to go back and start again. But let's say you get it right, then for any kind of recording, but especially for pieces to camera, the first thing you should do before you speak is to do a big clap. And then when you talk, you carry on with your recording. If anything goes wrong with your audio and it slips away from the video, you can tie it together by matching it to that clap. So that's just a top tip for pieces to camera. So we've covered screencasts, tutorial recordings, pieces to camera. The Open University focuses on written learning of maths and correspondence, but we do use videos for tricky pieces, and we know they do matter. So in contrast to the earlier speaker, our students use videos more compared to other resources. At the start of the module, they use everything. And at the end of the modules, you know, it's what they can still bear to do, and they still look at the videos, so we know that they do something for them. So I am a big advocate for video. It's just a question of how much time you've got to deliver to it. I think that, and a very, very, very last point is, it is all about the assessment. If you want the students to do something, assess them on it. If you want the students to talk back to you, assess them on it. You know, that they care about the grade, give them a grade for anything you want them to do. Okay, right, questions, sorry.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you. There's quite a lot of questions here now. Now it's my turn to do a piece to camera. I've actually, in my setup, I thought I'd light this up properly today, so I'm quite bright. But it does mean I've got 3 lights on me, and I'm burning up here now. I'm deeply regretting being perfectly lit. So a number of the questions are asking about handwritten notes. And I think we'll be dealing with that when we have Emma's talk, Emma Cliff's talk later on, which is about inclusion. So maybe some of those we can save till later. This idea of how do you make your handwriting accessible? So there was a question here: are the students present comfortable with actively participating in a recorded tutorial, or does it's disappeared, or does the fact that the session is recorded make them wary of saying anything? I mean, what do you feel about that? Are they?
Okay, well, I do a lot of tutorial observations, so I have seen students in different settings, and we now have the setup that we list the tutorial label as recorded or not recorded, so that students, have the option of which to attend. In the recorded settings, even at the end, we will say, right, we will switch the recording off if there's anything you wanted to ask that you weren't able to ask before. I don't think I would say I've noticed less participation in the recorded sessions. What I would say is that in tutorials, students are loath to participate. They will never use their microphones. The best I've ever seen is when they will chat at the start, and then as soon as the math starts, the silence starts. Boom, that's it. That's the end of them talking. They will use the chat box. They'll use that, and they will use that to ask questions and answer questions. You can set up anonymous polls, but I would say if you want them to speak back to you, you know, good luck. That is definitely a struggle.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I'm busy having a look through the questions here, and it's so hard to pick them. I think I'm going to change the way we do questions, because we've got 57 open questions here. So
I'd be happy to type answers during the next session if that helps.
Yeah, there's lots of questions there. Okay, so we'll go with this one. Anonymous attendee, what are your tips for encouraging peer support while adhering to safeguarding policies? So, I mean, I'm assuming this is to do with being in the tutorials, I think.
I don't know. I think it was because I also said that students chat better on Facebook, on WhatsApp when we're not there. Versus the moderated forums for safeguarding. So the OU runs moderated forums, and those things are safeguarded. They are not forbidden from doing things themselves outside of the Open University, and we're not responsible for them. And that is basically the answer to that. We have asked to join some Facebook groups, and the organizer of those groups is just happy for us to be there. And we just use that to be there for plagiarism. And there's nothing we could do about WhatsApp groups. But our students wouldn't have WhatsApp groups anyway, because they don't know each other. They don't have ways of exchanging phone numbers. They would only be able to find each other on a public space like Facebook. Whereas I know in face-to-face universities, you know, they're all big buddies and they've got WhatsApp groups, and you really have no control over what they do on those.
Right, okay, thanks. So I'll ask this other one. It says, how do students share mathematical writing in an online tutorial? How did he do that in the OU?
I'm not sure I would say that they do. One thing tutors might do is they would leave a one slide up, and then everybody can write on that slide. So, you know, if they say that, one thing they might do at the start of a tutorial is put a map of the country up and say, draw where you are, just a way to get everybody in. And then people can draw things on any slides if they say now put it up and enable their writing tools. But in general, just to keep the sense that there is a person there going, it's usually done through the chat box, and that's where they want them to do it. And it's not mathematical writing as such. It isn't. You can't do an integration symbol. It will just be those shorter questions. It's got a limitation. I would say the limitation is more strongly from what the students are willing to do rather than the technology lets you do. Right.
Okay. And so here's another one, which is kind of to do with accessibility, and it's something that I've had some experience of over the last few weeks, because I've been trying to put captions on videos. So here's, do you do closed captions on videos, and what resources do the OU have for that? So it's the next person, I don't know where they're from, but they said we are required to do it, but uni gives us no support. And adding captions more than doubles editing time. I would have thought triples. But anyway.
Yeah. We do it, but then this is what I was saying earlier. We have such a large student body that it is for certain that students within that group will have additional needs. So our publishing arm, when you give them a video, they go and caption it for you. So people are employed to put captions on for us. When it comes to recording tutorials, they are not captioned.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I think time's moving on. Now, so thank you very much, Katie, for that. So I'm going to give a round of applause there. The setup of the talks today was we were going to do 2 talks, about 20 minutes each, so that we have about 40 minutes or so. There'll probably be a little spillover, and then we'd have 20 minutes break. So what I'm going to do is before we do that, I shall share the PowerPoint that I have to show you the timetable, and as you can see, I'm very professional with this. It's already set up. Right, there we go. So you can see from 2:20 to 2:40 we'll have a break, and then the next next thing. But what I wanted to share with you beforehand was that if you have some experience from of COVID and you want to share that experience, there are a number of different ways you can do it. So for example, there's MSOR connections, and there's also teaching mathematics and its applications that you can submit articles to explain what you've discovered and to try and share things. And in particular, we'd like to share with you a special issue of Teaching Maths and its Applications, which is a call for papers and guest editors. So I'll leave this up for maybe a few minutes, and then after that I'll put on a 5 or 10 minute timer so we know when to restart. But anyway, if you're interested in this, then please contact Kathy Smith. I'm not sure you can see that, but I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see that. And what we'll do is we'll restart at 22. So that's 2:40, and I'll put a timer on so you'll be able to check. Okay, well, thank you very much, and we'll try and deal with this questions business, the Q&A. We're going to improve the Q&A on the fly. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to both our speakers. Right, Katie and Rob, if you're still there, then can you have a little look at the questions, see if you can answer some of those by typing? There's a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to do that now. I just was conscious that I didn't want to be videoed for all the rest of the sessions, and I'm not sure how people view each of the screens, but I'll look at those now.
Yeah, I'll be here.
I have replied to a few.
Fantastic, good, thanks.
I mean, actually, if you stop sharing your screen, does that make a difference? No, sorry, forget I said that. I'll just keep going.
Yeah, you should be able to ignore my screen.
Kevin, just when everybody comes back, you might like to tell people to change their chat so it goes to all panelists and attendees, because a lot of people have got it just going to panelists.
Oh, right. All right.
I think that's probably what the default is on there.
Okay, that's one thing we hadn't noticed really, had we? In practice. Right, so maybe for the questions, what we should do is allow everybody to see the questions and the attendees can upvote them. What do you reckon?
I reckon it will take hours.
I think that can work, Kevin.
In the 7 minutes or whatever that you've got. Yeah.
No, in fairness, he's got 9.
What? No, I mean, for the next session, next questions, we can set it so that.
Is that easy to do?
There's a push button for it, sorry, a radio button for it, and a text box. Checkbox for attendees can upvote and attendees can comment. So I don't know. I can't see the chat at the moment. So where's it gone? Is anybody saying anything in the chat saying?
Kevin, what you can do about the chat is if you make it pop out instead of just being pinned to the side. Can you see how you do that?
Yeah, I know, but.
And then you can put it on top of anything else.
Oh, sorry. I've just worked out what's gone on here. And no wonder I can't find anything. it's moved position when I started sharing. Oh dear. A valuable learning experience. Yeah, I know you can pop it out, but it has just disappeared from my screen. It must be just because I'm sharing. Oh well. I'll deal with it. So if any of my co-hosts, my co-organizers can see whether in the chat people are saying, yes, let's go with that, let's have upvoting, then we can go with that.
I think the only challenging thing with upvoting is that as you're reading the question, they move sometimes, because like another one. So just watch for that. But I think it's a good idea. Just be cognizant that might happen, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Right, so now I have managed to find the chat. Marvelous. Right, people do seem to be sometimes sending to all panelists rather than all panelists and attendees, which they may have intentionally wanted to do. I don't know, but it's up to them. But maybe they should be aware that all panelists and attendees might be better.
Robert, there's a question for you in the Q&A. In fact, I might have been answering some that were for you. I wasn't sure which were which. There's one about think, pair, share, which I'll leave for you.
I think I'm just looking at that one. There are a few in there that I wasn't sure whether it was to me or to yourself.
Yeah, just go for it. If you pick one and you can answer it, go for it.
Right. Can people, oh, what was it? How did I do that? Can people now see a timer?
Yep.
Should be getting big. Hey, what happened there? Should be nice and big now. Yeah. So we restart in a few minutes.
Kevin, is that your microwave?
Oh dear, oh dear. No, that's the timer going beep, 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 calling people back. Right, so there we go. Right, yes, good, good, good. So we should be coming back. I noticed a couple of people got their hands up. Unfortunately, we've not been tracking hands up because it was going to be too complicated. So if you want to attract our attention, unfortunately, you're going to have to put it in the chat. Okay, let's continue. So what we're going to be doing next, I'm really going to have to get a slave monitor, get loads of monitors around here. I'm going to do this sort of thing regularly. Just finding everything is a bit of a pain. Right, so you should be able to see the schedule for later on today. Well, the next two talks, we've got 2 more talks after that. So this is what we're going to be doing. One of the things I should have mentioned earlier was that we only decided to do this less than 4 weeks ago. So this has all been done extremely quickly. And I forgot to thank the University of Leeds for providing the Zoom facilities. Once, because we thought, well, maybe there'll be about 100 and something people sign up for this, and so we'll get about half, and that'll mean that we can just run it in a normal Zoom. And of course, things have just got up to 900 and something registered. So thanks to the University of Leeds for providing the Zoom. Okay. And again, it's one of these things where it's COVID, so we're having to do everything really, really quickly. And I've been learning a lot about how to do things online. So, right, so I should move on to our next speaker, who I can't find his bio. Right, which is George Kinnear, and George is a lecturer in technology enhanced mathematics education in the School of Maths at the University of Edinburgh. He completed both his undergraduate degree in maths and PhD in pure maths at the university. His research interests are in effective uses of technology to support undergraduate mathematics teaching, with a particular focus on the use of computer-aided assessment. Okay, take it away, George, please.
Okay, let me just turn on my screen share. Is that working now? Great. Okay, so just to echo previous speakers, thanks to the organisers for putting this together at short notice, and thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm looking forward to all the questions that we'll no doubt get at the end as well. So my input is going to be about how I've used quizzes to deliver a course online for the past 2 years now. So I have a bit of experience with this from non-COVID times. So in preparing this, I got to thinking about what I was doing this time 2 years ago. I was on a lovely long weekend in Vienna, enjoying the Rose Garden. But in the back of my mind was the fact that I had to design a new course. So I've been asked to develop a new 20 credit course for our incoming students. This was going to be covering the sort of content that you'd see in SQA Advanced Higher Maths or in Further Maths A Level. And that's aimed at really students who hadn't had the chance to do that at school or would benefit from some extra practice during semester 1. So the goal is to have this course ready by September, and the steer was that it was going to be delivered online. So even though these were on-campus students, we hoped that this course would be scalable so that it could go potentially beyond our own kind of School of Maths students to the wider university as just a sort of university maths experience that they might choose. And I should also say that this was a joint effort, so it was me and Richard Gratwick, who was a university teacher in the school at the time. So as well as the two of us, and we were fortunate to have lots of input from our colleagues as well. So thank you to all of them. The course ended up being called Fundamentals of Algebra and Calculus. And it has 10 weekly topics, so 5 loosely algebra and 5 on calculus. And we decided to alternate between those each week. And what I want to focus on in this session is the way that we've organised the content in those sections. So here, for example, is a typical one of those sections. So week 3 on polynomials and rational functions. This is in our local installation of Moodle. And the course is delivered as a series of quizzes in the Moodle VLE. So we have these quizzes at the top here, which are the main way that we deliver content in the course. And the ones at the bottom are the assessments for the week. So there's a whole story I could go into about how we do the weekly assessments and how that all works. But for today, I'm going to focus on the top section. So how we organise the material that the students work through and what they engage with in the course. So we have this consistent structure each week where there's getting started and then 4 sections of content. And those sections we're thinking of as equivalent to a lecture and the associated practice that they would do. So we tell students at the start of semester, each of those sections should be taking you about 2 hours to work through. So that's our sort of clear expectation. And we do encourage them to plan their timetable because they're going to need to schedule this time to work independently. Just dipping inside one of those sections then, so this is what one of these sections of content will look like. Just zooming in on what's up there on the left-hand side, this is broken down further into sections. So the students can see all the questions that are there and also the subheadings. So there may be like subheadings that you'd have in a chapter of lecture notes. And I guess what you're also noticing in this section, we've got some written exposition. So it's not just a quiz in the sense that here are some questions for you to answer. This really is the way that we're delivering the whole course. So there's no lecture notes or anything. It's just what they see in these set of quizzes. So we have all the expository content. We have short video clips of worked examples. And again, there's a whole story into how we went into recording those. That's maybe a story for another day. And also mixed in with all of this is a lot of problems for the students to work through and get practice with. So the general organising idea here is putting the textbook in the quiz. So this is something that I was discussing a lot with Chris Sanguin here in Edinburgh. And we've just published a preprint. So this will be appearing hopefully in a journal somewhere soon, but it's available for you to read online now if you wish. And that goes into the philosophy of this idea of putting the textbook inside the quiz and what are some of the possible implications of it. I should also mention that the questions that are appearing there are written quite often using STACK, so the STACK assessment tool. So here's an example of a question from this section. The student being asked to factorize a polynomial. And there's, again, so much that we could say about STACK, but just to give you the very quick whistle-stop tour, if you're not familiar with it, I think the main features are that we can randomize this. So we can use a computer algebra system behind the scenes to come up with different polynomials for them to factorize. From the student's point of view, when they type in their answer, they get immediate validation feedback. So if they miss out a bracket or something, in other systems that would count as a wrong answer. Here they can't even submit it until they're at least providing some sort of well-formed expression that can then be judged. So that massively cuts down frustrations that students have about typing in their answers. And also we have robust features for grading afterwards. So we have the computer algebra system Maxima behind the scenes, so we can take the student's answer and check various properties of it. And in that sense, the sky's the limit in terms of how much effort you want to put into giving tailored feedback to mistakes that you might detect. So I want to share with you 3 strategies that we use for adding in content to these quizzes. So there's lots of different ideas that you might have for how to put questions in to guide students' activity. These are just 3 ideas that I found myself regularly returning to. So the first is the idea of a faded worked example. So this happens quite a lot.
Oh, could I just interrupt for a second there?
Sure.
There's a number of comments in the chat about sort of like a high pitch sound in the background. Is that your laptop fan or a computer fan of some sort?
Possibly. Give me a second so I can demonstrate. I have an external microphone. I saw this mentioned in the chat. But because I'm on a Surface Pro, it's only got one USB plug. I was using that for a mouse. But let me switch over and use my external USB mic.
Yes, that's better, isn't it? I think people are going to, right. Okay. People are saying, thank you, that's so much better. I thought, oh, it'll be all right. It was only background noise, but yeah, plenty of people were saying. Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, thank you for interrupting.
Oh, hang on, back again. I'll let you carry on. I don't think there's much we can do about it now that you've swapped microphones. So
I think it was just that I'd plugged the microphone in, but it wasn't working. Is that working now? Yeah, so I just had to switch over to say use that other microphone. Okay, sorry about that. So this is me now on the blue ice. Okay, so faded worked examples. Quite often we'll have a procedure that we want students to get good at doing. So we'll give a worked example of that. And then you might then want to proceed to the student just solving problems for themselves. But instead, the idea of a faded worked example is to give them some sort of intermediate step. So the next thing that we would do instead is give them another example that's partially worked out and they need to fill in the final step. And then we might go to another example with a lot of scaffolding, even more for them to fill out. And depending on how complicated the procedure is, we'll maybe do a couple more goes of that, but eventually we get to a point where the student's solving the whole problem for themselves. So that's the idea of a faded worked example. It's quite easy to construct once you've got the template of one of the questions, you just produce some variants of it. And this came from a series of studies that were done into this technique, which found that structuring the practice in this way helps the students to learn how to do this procedure more effectively. So we do try to use that quite a lot in the course for these key procedures. The second idea that I return to a lot is getting students to construct examples. So this is an example of a question where the students are to give an example of a quadratic that has a certain number of intersections with y equals x squared. And next to this, there's an applet where they could vary the coefficients and see the effect of that on the graph. The idea here is to try and get the students working at a sort of higher level. So not just taking things that I give them and working with them, but exploring their own example space and what can they construct out of that. And a third idea that I often use in the quizzes is opportunities to promote retrieval practice. So there's a really consistent set of findings in cognitive science about the benefits of testing for learning. So the idea essentially that through retrieving information from memory, you learn better. So it's better to prompt students to do this active retrieval rather than have them restudy the same information. That's something known as the testing effect. So being tested on something does help you to learn it. So where I use that in the course, quite often in the sections where we're starting a new topic, it's a chance to get them to recall things from earlier. So when introducing integration, it's quite natural to say, here are all these derivatives that we were doing a few weeks ago. Rather than just present that to the students as a table, this is an opportunity to get them to engage in retrieval practice. So here's a question where they were to give what they think were the most important derivatives that they learned a couple of weeks ago. And using stack, of course, we can assess each of the rows and decide, does the thing that they give in the left column match with the derivative that they've given on the right? And we can also suggest some sort of overall feedback. So maybe they've given a reasonable set of examples, but we can always throw in some other ones that they missed. Now, that's just scratching the surface. Obviously, to fill out a whole course, you need lots of these ideas. Just to briefly mention a few, I do like multiple choice questions. So after introducing a concept, a new concept, then throwing in some very simple comprehension questions in the form of multiple choice, I think is a good idea. You can embed all sorts of things in these quizzes. So this is an example of a matching exercise where the students were to drag around the graphs of cubics so that they fit in the right place. And my course doesn't really have a lot of proofs in it, but for proof-based courses, we're starting to expand into that. And this is an example from a paper that Chris Sanguin's been writing with Robbie Bickerton, who's been writing a lot of stat questions for us. And they've been working on a first-year proof course, and they're getting students to kind of fill in gaps in proofs and answer questions about their comprehension of proofs that they've read. So there are ways to do this using automated assessment. So now I also just wanted to share kind of where things are going next. So if you do want to read more about the course, check out my website. So the paper that I mentioned with Chris is there. There's also a short paper that I've written that goes into the technical details behind those different strategies I was explaining to you. And just recently with Richard, we've written up an evaluation of the course. This was based on some interviews with students and also some data. So looking at the students who took our course versus the students who did not, but were also doing first year maths. Our students were at a disadvantage at the start. So on our test of incoming kind of high school maths ability in our diagnostic test, they were about 15 percentage points below the rest of the class. But after taking the course, they were at the same level. So I think there's some evidence here that this approach is effective. Where we're going next with this, so jointly with Igor in Auckland and Chris in Edinburgh, I've just secured some funding from the Universitas 21 network, and both our institutions are part of that. And what this is going to provide is a central Stack server where we can share resources, and colleagues who are not able to set that up locally in time will potentially be able to use that to deliver their teaching. We're going to be running a program of training workshops, more on that to follow. And we're also looking to coordinate the production of content. So what we're looking to base this on is the set of Helm workbooks, which are well tried and tested and hosted at Loughborough University. So working with partners, the aim is to take these workbooks, which have the form of, here's a note, here's a worked example, here's a problem for you to do, across all the different topics that you might want to do for engineering maths. We want to take that and turn it into a series of these fact-style quizzes. So if you would be interested in being part of that, joining this sort of partnership where we would divide up these workbooks and then share them by September, please get in touch with Chris Sanguin. He's going to coordinate who's on board for all of this. And finally, just to point out that we have a demo site available now where you can sign up and try out using Stack. On there, you will find a link to upcoming workshops. So we're going to start running them in a couple of weeks' time to enable you to get started with using Stack. And also further down the page, you'll see a list of available courses. So the workshops are there for you to self-enroll. You can also self-enroll in 1 week of the course that I was just talking about. So there's a whole week there that you can try out as a student. And just to finish up, this was also from my camera roll just from this weekend at the Modern Art Gallery near my house in Edinburgh. So it says, everything is going to be all right. Although actually, I think one of the lights is out and it says everything is going to be a light. So I hope that's, I hope they get around and fix their lights.
Right, well, thank you very much. Give a clap there. Right, okay, so as you could tell, we had some technical problems there. I hadn't realized that I hadn't spotlighted you, so the camera was on Katie for quite a while there, but as her camera was off, I think it's going to be just blackness on the video in that little tiny corner. So if anybody notices that, then do send me a notice. I wasn't monitoring the chat enough there. And also, it's a good idea to check the sound. I think that the noise was probably too high pitched for me, that I could hear it a little bit, but it was a bit. Right. So now, if we go to Q&A, I've changed the settings. So now you should hopefully, attendees, everybody should be able to see the questions, and you should be able to upvote them. And the first question that seems to be getting lots of upvotes is, how much more flexible is Stack than e.g. numbers? Now, this is this is going to be a big argument, isn't it, between Stack and numbers? I don't know whether I should ask you this. I'm just waiting to see if another question pops up. We will be doing numbers tomorrow morning, so you know, Christian will be able to have a comeback. So I don't know. Perhaps you could tell us. I mean, how well do you know numbers?
Not all that well. So I mean, I've looked at a few numbers questions. I've obviously been to some talks where I've heard the behind the scenes described, but I've not really written questions in numbers to be able to authoritatively say one is easier than the other.
Right. Well, can I start with a really awkward question? What do you think Numbers does better? Is it what's the weakness in Stack? And I'll remind me to ask Christian a similar question.
Yeah, so I think the clear thing is that with Numbers, it's more easily deployed remotely, I think, and it's going to be easier to get up and running, is my understanding of it. So it runs purely in the browser, so you can, easily quite easily get up and running. Whereas with Stack, you do need to have a server set up.
Okay, right, good, thanks. Well, okay, I should have got rid of that one there, shouldn't I? Because now we've started to get things coming up here. So this Stack system, this is from Answer Live. This Stack system looks really good. Can it be used by individuals, or does it need uni buy-in?
Yeah, I think you would need some sort of university systems working here. So in our institution, we use Blackboard Learn. So the Stack question type lives within Moodle, and so that's a problem, except that you can easily hook these things together. So we just got our IT people to set up a link from Blackboard that speaks to the Moodle server, which we run within the School of Maths. And from the student's point of view, they log into my course in Learn, they just click a link and it takes them through and they're in just to the Stack quizzes. So they don't need to worry about logins and things. And on the other way around, the grades come back through into Blackboard. So if you get your IT people on board, then they can set that up so that it's kind of seamless across different platforms.
Right, okay, thanks. There is a question by John Mayer about, could you please send a link to the paper by Chris Sanguine related to filling in the blanks in proofs? Could somebody put that in the chat, Rachel or Michael, if you know what that is?
Chris has just responded to that, and there's a link in the chat to that paper.
Great, good. Right, so we can get that one out of the way. So another anonymous attendee: is it possible to create a question in Stack that grades line by line, working rather than just the final answer?
Yes, so Chris has been working on that feature over the past few years. I've not used it an awful lot, but it is definitely possible. So there's kind of two ways of working where the student says, there's this line which is equal to this line, which is equal to this line, and Stack can check that indeed those equalities are true all the way through. There's the other way of working, which is they're maybe working on a sort of if and only if, where they're taking an equation and then maybe squaring both sides and then doing something else to it. And again, Stack can check that those mathematical expressions are equivalent. So that feature is there. I think it's quite a newish feature, so I'm not aware of a huge amount of people having used it. But I know Chris has used it to some extent in his first year proof course for kind of short chunks.
Right, okay. So we can get rid of that one. Somebody wants to know where you can get Stack. You should be able to find that online by going to the Edinburgh site, I guess. Just Stack Edinburgh should be.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's the demo site. So that would be the place to look.
Yeah, best place to look. So, oops, I keep forgetting to answer them live. So let's add some. We've got a question here from Jeremy Leversley. Have you got an alignment of what you specifically want to test in terms of levels of attainment, Bloom's taxonomy, and what you can do in this framework?
Yeah, so there's obviously some things that Stack is not suited to doing. So automatic assessment can only take you so far. For this course, I think that was fine. It's quite a method-based course, and so in a lot of ways, there's a kind of perfect marriage there, that we want the students to get good at these procedures. Stack is quite capable of checking if they have. If we were doing a kind of more proof-based course, I know that Chris is already using Stack to do some parts of it, so the proof comprehension type questions can be used there to get at some of what you want. But still, you're ultimately going to want students to be writing out proofs and mathematical arguments that will need to be human checked. But there, because I think that would fit within this model. If you have some amount of human marking available, I didn't in this course because I wanted it to scale. I should have mentioned that I had 110 students first year, 180 this past year, with just me lecturing it essentially, and me and Richard in the first year. So we weren't going to be human marking a lot of stuff. That was why we lent heavily on getting the automated assessment ready up front. But if you did have time for marking, then you can use the Moodle quiz. You can put in questions where the students type in their answer or upload a photo, and you can go through and mark them afterwards. So there is a way of mixing those if you want to test things that you can't do automatically.
Okay, I've been trying to go through the questions. It seems as though Chris Sanguin is answering a lot of them as we go along. I'm not quite sure how we're going to record all this. I don't know how Q&A is recorded, but there is another question here that's been voted up. It's about the faded examples. So it says, thank you for the idea of faded examples. Is this more effective for procedural rather than conceptual understanding?
I mean, certainly what I've seen written about it, it's designed for sort of training in these procedural techniques. So I'm not sure what it would look like for something conceptual. Certainly in that direction, the example that I showed of when I was talking about proof, let's see if I can go back. So that's something towards a faded proof construction that Chris has been thinking about. So if you want students to get good at doing a proof by induction, maybe you show them a proof by induction, then you show them one where there's bits for them to fill in, then you show them one where there's more bits for them to fill in, and then eventually they write one up that you mark by hand, potentially. But I'm not sure about other kind of conceptual things that you might be thinking about.
Right, okay. Okay, so I think that worked a little bit better for questions and answers. So thanks very, I'm seeing some nods. So thanks very much to George for that great little talk there.
Yeah.
And we'll move on to our next speaker, who I believe has arrived. Good, yeah, I can see it now. Right, so Minia Chekin, I knew I'd mess it up. Chetinkia, is it even close? Was it?
Close.
Close. Oh, sorry. I should have just practiced all day, really, shouldn't I?
Don't worry about it.
Chetinkaya Rundell is a senior lecturer in statistics and data science at the University of Edinburgh. Mina works on the Open Intro project, whose mission is to make educational products that are free, transparent, and lower barriers to education. So she's also the creator and maintainer of Data Science in a Box, and teaches the popular statistics with R MOOC on Coursera. So take it away, Mina.
Thank you. Let's see if I can get this right. Are you seeing the slides or the presenter view?
I think people are still seeing me. I'm seeing in the chat.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, Mina should be highlighted. Spotlighted rather, and I can see her remote teaching 3 myths. So
Great. So you're seeing the full slide and not the presenter view, right? Wonderful. Okay. Well, thanks for having me. So today we're going to talk about 3 myths about remote teaching, and I don't know if they're necessarily myths, but they're basically these 3 opposing ideas that I've been hearing about over the last few months of talking lots and lots about remote teaching. So I'm going to get right into it. The 2 sides of one of these coins is pedagogy should drive technology on one extreme end, and technology should drive pedagogy in the other extreme end. And I feel like there's a happy medium between the 2. So what do I mean by that? First of all, I think it's incredibly important to have consistency within your course. So you want to try your best to stick to the toolkit you introduced in your syllabus, and not necessarily make a bunch of changes, which is never a good idea anyway, but I think even less so in an online environment. But also, after careful thought, you should be ready to pivot if need be. If you feel like some technology you've chosen is simply not working for the audience that you're working with, by all means, that's time to move away from it and do something else. And how are you going to do this? get early feedback as much as possible. So even mid-semester feedback, I think, is too late. Think about some sort of a survey that you can give to your students around week 2 of the class, once, you know, maybe the dust settles of Droppad or something like that, to make sure people are able to hear you, see you, read what you're posting, are comfortable with the technology that you've chosen. And if there are any sticking points, right away is the time to change. Now, additionally, I think it's really important to have consistency across courses. Students are, you know, not just taking your course, but many other courses as well. So if you are able to stick with the same technology across courses, great. But I think that is not so easy. But something to keep in mind is that you have access to a particular tool or technology doesn't necessarily mean students have access to it. So if the university paid for it, it's most likely free for your students as well. But that means that you should advocate for your choices if they provide the most useful features of for your pedagogy. And if there is no way to use a certain tech tool that you prefer, it's important to kind of leave that behind and don't make this your students' problem. I think as we're testing out a bunch of technologies, I find myself in lots of faculty meetings, you know, complaining about this one and that about that one. But I feel like that all is going to have to stop when we have students in front of us, really, and we're teaching. And we need to kind of move on from that experimental stage to this is what we've chosen to work with, and here is the best we can make of it. The next is to make required software a breeze to get started with. And I don't just mean easy, literally a breeze to get started with. So I'll give an example from one of my courses. So I teach R, and even on campus, I prefer to have students access the computing environment in their browser instead of installing it locally, because installation pain is real and very difficult to walk students through. And it's even more difficult from far away. So choosing a cloud-based access solution, in this case, for my case, that was RStudio Cloud, means students can get started coding in R as quickly as they can type netflix.com in their browser window. I think that's the sort of barrier you're looking to get students started with the work that you're giving them. Another thing is you want to think about what other bells and whistles these technologies bring. So an example here is that with this technology, I'm actually able to drop myself into a student's R session and actually see what they are doing in real time or asynchronously. So ideally, they would be asking any questions on something like a discussion forum. But the reality is sometimes it's hard for students to articulate themselves. So you want a way to be able to almost peeking over their shoulder as you would if you were physically in the same room with them. And next is less is more. Be judicious with the number of tools that you're implementing and you're using in your class, and try to limit options when possible. So my mantra for this is you'll love and use regularly doesn't always mean best choice for your course. For example, for my collaboration work, I love using Slack. And for community involvement as well. But is it the best choice for course communication? Probably no. Threaded discussion forums where students can actually upvote and link to other posts is a much better way of answering questions than some of these real-time chat tools. Similarly, you might use GitHub for regularly for version control and collaboration. And is it the best choice for, say, your data science students? Probably yes. So it is a tool that's hard to learn, but in that case, it's actually serving a learning goal. And the last thing is to remember is that free to use doesn't mean free to learn in terms of time it takes. So there's all these like nice pieces of online engagement things that are popping up, but each and every one of these new pieces of software is another inch that students have to climb on the learning curve. The next coin with the two sides is you can't build a community without everyone in the same place at the same time, or can't have synchronicity while being fair and equitable. So what do we do about these two? The first thing is to consider the real added value of being synchronous. So attending a synchronous lecture has some nice benefits. You see others' faces, you hear others' questions. There's probably other stuff you're thinking of that I don't have on my slides. But working on a problem as a small group has a lot more. You get those two, but you also get the thinking together and the learning from each other. So between these two, if you have limited options for synchronicity, go for things where students would actually have to be working with each other and not just watching you. And weigh the added value against the challenges of synchronous engagement. Are the students all in the time zone? Do they all have access to a device? Do they all have access to more than one device? Do they have internet access? And if they do, can it actually handle video? Do they have an additional screen, larger screen? Do they have the setup to see you on video simultaneously and say be coding in RStudio at the same time? If these are not assumptions that you can easily make, then maybe some of the synchronous activity that you're asking from them is actually they won't be able to get the full benefit anyway. My tip for that is pick your smallest device and try your learning materials on that. If it looks wonky, then it's wonky. And also think about people's living circumstances. Some students may not have access to a quiet space or a private space to join a course. And so, requiring engagement activities that makes them have to turn on their video or even audio may not always be feasible. And the other thing is, and I think this is important, especially for more junior faculty, like I feel so bad for people who are like starting to teach next year. I think that we are going to be missing one of the most rewarding aspects of being faculty, and that is personal interactions with students. So wherever possible, I think it's going to be useful to use synchronicity to reinvent there. Make yourself available. For example, instead of having 2 hours of chunk of office hours a week, spread them across the week, 20 minutes at a time almost. So there's more opportunity for people to come in. Maybe if you're able to make yourself available for a virtual coffee that students can sign up for. And remember, this won't be forever, I hope. So hopefully this is a situation that we're going to learn a lot from, but not necessarily going to be living in forever. And the last coin that I'll talk about is asynchronous teaching means making lots of videos. And on the other side, there's already a video on every concept that I might want to teach. And I think here the pain is real. We do talk about videos a lot, and that's exactly where my mind goes as well when I think about remote learning. But a few tips there is, first of all, it's okay not to be an expert video maker. Build on what you know. Making video animations is difficult. But if you already say make graphics in R, it might be a lot easier to animate them. Or if you make them in Keynote or PowerPoint, use those and leverage those as opposed to trying to learn a new video software. If there are existing videos that teach the material that you teach, instead of recreating them, supplement them. So one of my plans is to actually have these weekly 15-minute videos that are kind of like State of the Union that I'll shoot and release on a weekly basis, based on what happened last week in the class. What were the questions that came up in the discussion forum? Make a plan and learn from others. There's actually literature on making videos for teaching, and I'll link to a couple of them at the end of my slides. So read these things. And the other thing is think beyond the camera in your laptop. So I'll give an example here of I teach randomization-based simulation, and oftentimes we do like shuffling things with playing cards. So here is me using another camera where I videotape actually me shuffling the cards. And I tried to animate this whole thing, and it was actually much more difficult. And then I realized I don't actually just have to use that webcam. I can use it at different angles. So try to get a little bit innovative where you can. And video is only one of the many options for asynchronous engagement. So think about interactive applets and think about interactive tutorials. I'll post a link to these slides at the end, and those are all live links that you can follow through. And finally, you can build an asynchronous community. So I personally think that engagement opportunities like post 5 questions on Piazza over the semester are dreadful for students. So I think it's important that we get them engaging with each other, but maybe we want to be a bit more innovative there. Have them do peer review of their work. So they have to engage and do so meaningfully. Reading with collaborative note-taking. So with it at University of Edinburgh, we've been testing out the system called Perusal for doing that. There's also an open source version called Hypothesis. I've used Google Docs to have students collaboratively build answer keys in the past, and they really love that activity. And finally, there are some other services that were actually built initially for remote working environments that I'm thinking of playing around with. Some opt-in virtual communication opportunities for your students. So what Virtual Donut does is people can opt in to sign up for it, and it randomly assigns them and finds a time on their calendar to have 15 minutes of chat with each other. here is an incomplete list of resources and with all live links. So in the next slide, I'll post a link to my slides that you can take a look. You will see that they are more heavier on the stats, data science, and computing side, since that's what I teach, but hopefully there's some useful resources there in terms of both doing work synchronously and asynchronously remotely. And finally, I thought this would be a good opportunity to think about us learning together as well. If you're not all zoomed out by this time and you would like to kind of participate in further learning about this, these are the types of things that I think that if you are teaching statistics or data science or a computing heavy course that you might be interested in. So we're kind of contemplating offering these workshops, but I also wanted to gauge some interest before I do so. So that will take you to a form where you can either opt in to give me your email address and I will let you know when we organize them, or a link to where we would post them. So even if you don't feel like giving up your email address, do express preferences. And if you have other colleagues who teach this stuff, please feel free to share it with them over the next week, and then I will reach out. So I'll stop here and leave a link to the slides at the bottom, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. We haven't had many questions yet in the chat. So not the chat. Questions in the Q&A. Got to get the difference there. So if people would like to put questions in, I guess what's going to happen is they're going to appear at the bottom, and if you want to upvote them, you'd have to look at the bottom, and then when they get upvoted, they pop to the top. I had hoped to be able to use the timestamp on this, but the timestamp seems to give the local timestamp. So for example, somebody's got 10:15 a.m. as the time. So, right.
Would you like me to pick something from the Q&A, or I can't really see the upvote count? So.
Yeah, I can't see any upvotes. So I was just trying to scroll through and find something that wasn't related to Stack. So
we can do Stack questions. George is still here.
Yeah, you can answer the Stack questions, obviously. I should have said at the end of the Stack thing that other automatic marking things are available, as we'll see. So maybe I'll ask a question. Stop. Maybe I'll ask a question. I mean, what's the biggest problem you have then with in the sort of remote learning that you do?
I think that the engagement part is going to be the biggest problem here. So the course that I kind of most commonly teach has a big teamwork component to it. Students come to weekly workshops where they code together and they do a data analysis together, and they do it in teams. And the culminating project at the end is kind of the one nice thing that they get out of the class at the end, and it's an important part of the assessment. I think that the team dynamic management is going to be a lot more difficult. One idea is to team up students according to their time zone. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit hesitant about that as well, even though that's probably the best option we have, because then you're grouping students in terms of geography, and we're losing one of the essential parts of their learning experience, which is exposure to diversity. So how we find the balance between that is, I think, something that we're gonna need to evaluate as the course goes along. I have done remote teaching before, but it was students had signed up for it, if you will, and they were, and so there wasn't necessarily a teamwork component to it. I would like to keep that on. So one change that I'm going to make to the course is the teamwork is consistent throughout the semester. Usually we wouldn't switch up the teams during the semester. However, I think in this upcoming semester, I want to be a bit more flexible, try things out for a few weeks and see if there's a better configuration we can settle things into. So that's one modification I'm thinking I might need to make from a in-person learning environment.
Right, okay. There is actually a question that's getting a lot of upvotes, which is sort of connected with what you were saying, but what do you mean by collaborative note-taking?
So what I mean by, so the systems called Hypothesis and Prusel are both, if you were to say, if you have a textbook for your course, or you have a PDF, like they're reading a paper or something like that, they can, students can actually highlight and leave notes, and the next student is able to see that and comment on that. So that would be one way of doing this sort of, so they are engaging with the reading, the text that you've given them, but they're actually able to communicate with each other. And the nice thing about it is it's asynchronous, so they're able to do it on their own time, but still meaningfully engage. The Google Docs version that I mentioned is more that if you sprinkle either throughout your videos or other learning materials, kind of thinking questions for your students to work, kind of answer along the way, and maybe open a Google Doc where they can put their own answers, they can start editing each other's answers, and they seem to really like that exercise of editing down to a correct answer and then having an artifact of that that they can take away.
Right. Okay. There is a question here, which is kind of like a general question for all the speakers, but I can pose it to you. So it says, we've looked for solutions to have students sharing their handwritten work with us during online seminars, not so much to write on screen live, as they may not have the kit, but for me as a tutor to see and annotate and give feedback. I have tried many things, but wanted to hear your tips. So do you have something that you use? You gave a number of resources, but is there anything that you use to do that?
So this is for students to do the writing? Is that the question?
Well, it says, yeah, students sharing their handwritten work.
Yeah, so I find that if it is happening synchronously,
but it's also so you can annotate and give feedback on it.
Right. So I find that for students sharing their handwritten work synchronously, if they don't have some sort of a document camera kit, actually a cell phone with a tripod, like the earlier speaker Katie had mentioned, goes a long way for that. But for asynchronous stuff, one of the tools that I have used for marking work like that is, and we've experimented, a few of the courses at Edinburgh this semester experimented with it, called Gradescope, which actually eases for instructors to do this sort of marking of handwritten work. You are ultimately not handwriting on it necessarily, but it makes the delivery of the feedback back to the students quite streamlined. Otherwise, if you're just looking to annotate a PDF, the stuff that I've used is GoodNotes on my iPad.
Right, good. And I wonder if the other speakers could perhaps stick in the chat, maybe, rather than have them turn on their microphones again, and stick in the chat, see that they have an answer to that. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time. We've overrun just slightly, so that's okay. So let's thank Mina again. And it's good that you mentioned Gradescope, because I don't think we're going to be covering that, but it's something which is a lot of people are interested in. And well, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the slide to show you what we're doing now. And I'll try and spotlight myself this time, so you get a chance to see me again and see my wonderful Mandel map, whatever it's called, poster. And share this, saying what we're doing next. So until 3:40 we'll be having a break, but before we disappear, I'll just mention that we didn't, as I say, cover something like Gradescope, but we have to think about, since there was a lot of interest in this workshop, what we're going to do going forward. So we thought perhaps we could do some how-to videos, maybe we could do some of those and stick them up on the website. We could do follow-up workshops and events. So at some point we're going to collect information on what you would like to see, and I was thinking people would probably like to see something like Gradescope, perhaps demonstrated, you know, how to get it to work. So so that's something to be thinking about. But in the meantime, I think what we should do is we should all go and grab something to drink, have a little rest, and we'll come back at precisely 3:40, and we'll kick off from there. Okay, well, thanks very much to both our speakers in this particular session. We've got 2 more after the break, so look forward to seeing you all then. Okay, thank you. All right, there we go. And it's always strange for me because there's no response from anybody. That's one of the problems of online stuff, isn't it? Right.
Kevin, if only it was restricted to the online world for me. Lack of response.
Well, at least in classes I do get to hear them groan.
Oh, no,
Kevin, there's somebody in the chat window, which is quite a good point actually, that said when people ask a question, can they put who they're directing the question to? Because it's quite tricky for people to know what they're voting for when they move around the place.
Yeah, I think that's a bit awkward now that we've got so many questions.
Yeah.
We can't, because I don't want to dismiss them because I don't know whether that really makes them disappear and we never get them back again. But should we tidy up?
I've dismissed a few questions which were to do with like just saying thanks. And if you look, the questions have got 3 tabs at the top and one of them says dismissed.
Yeah.
So I reckon, yeah, they're still there. If you dismiss something, it doesn't go forever.
Yeah, it does allow us to reopen them, but I can't work out how you're supposed to set the saving of the Q&A. I did actually go and have a look at that, and it says you go and click this particular button, but I can't find that particular button. So, so should we just tidy up the Q&A here by dismissing some of
I think we should tidy it up by answering them, all of us together, all the people. Go through and find ones that fit you.
Yeah,
I don't think it matters about dismissing them. I think it was more, as people ask a new question, if they just put the name or initials of who it's directed to.
Yeah, so
might be a bit easier.
Yeah, it might be, because I mean, there's one that says, "Can you tell us a bit more about virtual donuts?"
Yeah,
I can't remember who was talking about that.
Yeah,
at all. I don't remember.
I mentioned it. I will put a link there.
Right. So yeah, we could tidy those up and let's clear as many as possible out of there. See if I can find something.
Can I do a sound check, do you think?
Who was that?
Yeah, go for
It's
it,
Ben.
Ben.
Yeah, it's just that I've been having yes, I've been having a lot of problems with the audio, and I've had to move downstairs, in fact, in order to get closer to the internet connection.
Yeah,
so
good idea.
I hope it's going to be all right.
We can hear you loud and clear, though.
That's all right, is it?
Yeah, you're all
right.
Are
you going to be on video? I at the minute can't see Ben. Is that a thing?
No, that's deliberate, actually. I'm not going to have my. I mean, actually, that's my modus operandi anyway, as I'll explain. I don't usually have video because actually it's distraction. First of all, it uses up bandwidth, and secondly, who wants to look at me? They should be looking at the screen, and it means that you don't have to worry about what you're doing, whether you're picking your nose or whether you're sort of looking to see where because you've lost your place in the notes and all that stuff. You don't have to focus. You don't have to worry about that. So I actually think it's a benefit not to have a video of yourself in giving when you teach. So that's my modus operandi. So I won't be having a video. Just as well because I've had to move to a place where my backdrop is not as beautiful as the one that Kevin has. Let's put it that way.
We can't all look as good as Kevin, can we, really?
Oh, thank you very much. But I bought that off the internet. It's not. If anybody's interested.
You drew it earlier.
I'm multi-talented. Yeah, it's called Mandel Map, I think. It's really good.
It's good.
Yeah. Okay. We've still got a lot of open questions and about 7 or 8 minutes.
I've been answering questions the whole time, and it's just they're arriving faster than I can answer. We're 83 answered, 32 open. I'm sure if 4 of us are attacking them,
there's quite a lot of answered questions, in fairness.
Yeah. There is, but somebody says, "Does anyone have a link to this virtual donut thing?" And I can't find anything on that.
I think was it Mina just said that? I'm sorry, I've got the names in front of me. Just said that she would be able to put the link in.
Yeah, live coding sessions. More advice on that. I'll do that one.
I have a technical question, which is at the moment, when someone writes something to the chat, it appears, and I'd rather not have that when I'm talking. Is there any way to disable that? Do you know?
Yeah, it
Or will
should,
that not happen when?
it should.
I
it
just
should
don't know how
be
to do it.
there.
I'm not a Zoom fan. Well, I'm not familiar with Zoom. I use it for my family things, but then that's it.
Can you just close the chat? I'll just see what happens when I close my chat.
If
can
you
just-
chat into it,
I think even if you close it, it still pops back up. The only way that I've found to deal with it is to whack it all the way off the side of your screen.
Yeah, but when you're actually sharing, doesn't it disappear? I mean, that's my experience. They may have changed that because they're constantly updating. Do you want to share your screen now? And
yeah, if I share my screen and then okay, let me share my screen.
I'll stop sharing my thing. You do what you need to do. You share and then see what happens. Pretend it's going.
I just thought I had shared. Okay, now I'm sharing. And now is that so you can see my slides now and I can play it from the start. But now I don't know what happens when you do this. I won't actually see anything, will I?
Well, this is
you're
presenting, right? So can you see the chat now?
No, I just see the number in the chat. I think I don't see the chat.
Right.
No, it's okay now, I think. Yeah, so let me just check if I play this. Okay, that's fine. So I won't see anything. I won't see you. I won't see anybody. That's how I like it, I can just focus on talking.
You shouldn't do, but if the chat window at the top, there's like a down arrow, and one of the options, or I think there's only two options, and one of them is to close. So that might be the other way of doing it. If you don't want to look at the chat outside of this, I don't think it's a problem when you're sharing.
Okay.
But otherwise, you should be able to click the down arrow in the window of the comment box.
Okay. I think I'm all right. I think I'll stop sharing now and then okay, that's great. I think it'll work. So thank you very much. I'll mute my microphone. How is everybody, by the way? I thought it's gone very well, actually. I've learned something.
In the chat, they're saying panelists, we can still hear you out here in the school.
Yeah, I was about to say, do bear in mind that we can be heard. I mean, this is not... We can still be heard. I mean, I'm entirely aware of that.
Well, of course, I'm not saying I realize that, and you're recording it too. It's going out to the world. Yes, of course. It's great.
You think Ben was about to say,
I'm being complimentary. All right, I'll mute my microphone now.
Right. Okay, I'm just going to start dismissing things. Oh, I've done that one. Just to try and we can resurrect them, so perhaps somebody can go through them later on, because I think it's too confusing, at least for me. Later on, somebody can go through. Some tips for evaluation, please. Oh, yeah.
Well, okay, but I am working through the ones that are for me, and I'm nearly done. If you dismiss them, I probably won't find them.
No, there is one for you. I can see that. Hi,
There's a few, yeah. I've still got. I mean, they've not got my name on them necessarily, but I read them at the time, so I do know. I probably need about 10 more minutes, and mine will be gone.
Right. Okay. I forgot to start doing the timer, didn't I? Right. I'll start that. It'll go off for me. Oh, I don't know what that's to. Yeah, I'll see if I can resurrect these later on. Some of these are good questions, but who's going to answer them?
I think you might be dismissing things I'm answering. Do you want to just keep going and I'll try and find them in the dismiss pile then?
Yeah, maybe.
Right, I'll start from there then.
Is RStudio Cloud available classes of 100 or more? Okay, I don't know. I think that's more manageable. Yeah, wow, okay. Anyway, we're getting on for 3:40. Everybody should have got themselves a cup of tea, cup of coffee, cocktails or something, I don't know. Right. Oh, there's plenty of messages for me in the chat. Sorry, I've not been looking. Okay, folks, shall we come back and get ready to start again? I've been trying to sort out the Q&A, as you might have, if you've been watching, you might have seen that. So there's a few left which I haven't quite got down to dealing with. But if you start putting them in now, then people will be able to see the new questions a lot easier, I think. So I think we'll be able to cope with the questions a bit better, because I think there was too much to wade through before, and then selecting them. Okay, so right. Unfortunately, while I was doing that, then I forgot to look up Ben's introduction. Ben, did you send me an introduction? Ben hasn't got his microphone on anymore. So
I did indeed. I sent you an email, but yeah. I'm not speaking yet, so you've got 20 minutes.
What?
I'm not speaking yet, am I?
Oh, it's Emma. Oh, sorry.
So you're all right. In your email. But I don't need an introduction. It's all right.
Emma, are you here? I didn't.
I am.
Ah, good. Yes, yes, I remember seeing your picture now earlier on. Good. Oh, thank goodness for that. So at least somebody knows what's going on. I'm going to have to do a lot of editing tonight, aren't I, just to get rid of all these bits. Sorry. Yes, Emma, are you ready to go? I was thinking Ben would be next.
I am ready. Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry, I don't have an introduction for you either, and so you're going to have to tell everybody about your background in accessibility. So anyway, sorry about that, folks. I'll just hand things over to Emma Cliff to give us our next talk. So Emma, if you please.
Thank you. So hopefully people can now see me speaking. Yep, okay, I've been spotlighted. So I'm Emma Cliff. I work at the University of Bath, where I head up the Mathematics Resources Centre, but I've also, over the last 15 years, had a particular interest in disabled students accessing degree courses which contain substantial quantities of mathematics. I've worked with some blind and visually impaired students, but also a large number of dyslexic students on the autistic spectrum, etc. There are other people out there who specialise more in things like dyslexia. I focus on the technical and practical aspects of getting a screen reader to work, for instance. Now, I don't have slides, I have a document and some things I'm going to try and show you because I really like to make life as hard as possible for myself. I'm not going to get through everything in the document, but it's there live and there's lots of links in it you can follow of places you can get started with things, some of which are simple, some of which are much harder. I'm also unlikely to be able to cover everything because this is a huge area. So I'm going to share my screen and also my sound. So hopefully you can now all see a web page which is entitled Accessible Maths e-Resources. I can no longer see anyone else, so for all I know, I'm talking to no one right now. So I'm going to try and focus on where do you start. But first of all is understanding why it's important to think about it. Then what is it, kind of basically speaking, you need to do, and then places to get started. So why is it important? Well, I'm not a lawyer, and you should talk to your own institution's lawyers about how they interpret what you need to do. But there is a legal requirement. The Equality Act 2010 sets that out in the first instance, and there's quite clear guidance to higher education institutions about, for instance, making accessible electronic notes. But more recently, there is the snazzily named Public Sector Bodies Websites and Mobile Applications #2 Accessibility Regulations. Your institution will have by now, by law, a statement about accessibility somewhere on their website, because this law kicked in last September, October time. But there's a secondary date, which is this kind of September time, where more things kick in about what has to be done. And we need to have our eyes on that. Now, this is about websites and mobile applications, but it includes in it virtual learning environments and every document that is put on them as well. So this is quite wide-ranging in its scope. If you want to learn more about the legal requirements, then AbilityNet have got some great webinars and some resources which help, really aimed at the higher education sector, which help you to understand these requirements more. But actually, I think we should carry in a different way, because if you look at the mathematics subject benchmark, it states that mathematics at university level is characterized by the need for a high degree of conceptual and abstract thinking within the learning process. And we want students to have the processing capacity to engage with those concepts and abstract thinking. But if a student has a print disability or difficulties with taking notes, with memory, with concentration, they might be spending substantial amounts of processing capacity on entirely different tasks. And that's true whether they're physically located on campus or at the other end of a computer. But now, in this kind of tricky time we live in, all students, except those at the Open University, who are new to e-learning, they're trying to find new ways to learn and consume mathematics. And this will require them to interact with resources in new ways, and that will impact their processing capacity. So I think it's not just an access thing right now. So what do you need to do? Generally speaking, we need to make it possible to access and consume information in a variety of ways. Okay. All students, but especially those with e.g. dyslexia, will benefit from interactive, responsive resources, which are colourful, well-rendered mathematics and graphics, enriched by video and audio. Go for it. Quizzes, all these kind of interactive things that people are talking about, absolutely. But such resources can raise practical and technical barriers for other disabled students, in particular those using a screen reader or who need to have text content read aloud, so they're sighted but they are dyslexic, so they need text read aloud perhaps. People who are colorblind, where color is being used for meaning, poor graphics that don't magnify or zoom well, dynamic pages which have got multiple things going on simultaneously are hard for VI users. So we've got a kind of almost a difficulty here in that the needs of some and the needs of others are actually kind of against each other in some ways. So there's no magic thing that you do which makes everything accessible for everybody. But there are some things that we know are a real problem. So computers and the assistive technology that some students will use to e.g. have maths read aloud to them, they rely on structural integrity to process that maths. So what I mean by that is, if I have typed a fraction in, then the piece or the document I have needs to retain the connection between the two different parts of the fraction and the fact it is a fraction. Now, PDF does not retain that. It doesn't matter whether it came from LaTeX, from Word, it doesn't retain that information. It's lost when you create the PDF. Print, obviously, it's lost then. Handwriting, it's lost, except for if you can see it. And ebooks which use images of maths, websites that use images of maths also can't be processed. So these formats are all inaccessible and inflexible, but also not just from an access point of view, but also on small screen devices. So just treat them as a lossy format for maths. Imagine that if you do this, some member of your audience won't be able to access that mathematical content. On the other hand, we have Word, HTML-based formats, EPUB 3. They have structural integrity for maths, and they're accessible to many assistive tech. but, and this is the moment in time we live in right now, not all of the assistive technology that all different students will use can access maths in all the different formats. So one screen reader user will be able to access maths in Word documents, and another will be able to access maths in EPUB, and another in HTML, but they can't swap between. So we need to provide as much choice as possible as we can. PowerPoint 365 is theoretically accessible, but most assistive technology won't work with it yet, and it can't be transformed to other formats. So if possible, stay away from PowerPoint right now. So using assistive tech effectively for the maths does require the authors to do something to produce accessible materials. So how do you get started? So from a technical point of view, you need to be producing all of your content, all of the things that the learner needs to be able to access in one of those three formats, and ideally more than one. HTML using MathJax to render the mathematics, Word, or EPUB 3. And earlier, and I've borrowed the word spine from, I think it was Katie earlier, supply the course content spine in that format. Ensure that it's all there in that format. You also need to supply PDF though. Even though I'm saying it's inaccessible, for some students, it's actually the best thing. So it won't help you meet the legal requirement, but a clear print PDF is the format most often selected by the disabled students in the Department of Mathematical Sciences at Bath. We provide all of these formats, but that's the one most of them select. So you've got a large range of formats that you might want to produce. I'm going to go through some of those formats now. So you might be producing web straight out. Now that might be because you're using something like Numbas or Stack, and so you're working on a web-based thing. You might be typing pages straight into Moodle. So what is it that you need to meet? You need to meet the legal requirement of WC AG 2.1 level AA. That's the new requirement, which comes in September. And you can check that using a variety of kind of plugins to Chrome. Accessibility Insights for Web plugin is probably the easiest to pick up and use, but there's many others. Ideally, you want someone else to do that hard work for you. So ideally, you want to be working in the system where you know the kind of standard thing you're producing already meets that, and so you're not having to do lots of checking. What those things won't do is check that the maths is accessible. So to check it's MathJax, which is what you need, right click on it. If it says about MathJax help, then that's accessible mathematics. You don't need to think any further about that. Why MathJax? It provides navigation, chunking, so someone can move through the equation piece by piece when they're hearing it. People can zoom to very high zoom. People can copy and paste. You can use color. You can also allow size and layout changes. So for instance, if I want to change the line height here, it's not affecting the mathematics. If I want to change my font to something that dyslexic students might find useful, I can do that in this resource. I can also turn on a high contrasting. So just by producing accessible web pages, but also the MathJax maths within them, people have a lot of flexibility to meet their own needs. And the structural integrity of MathJax enables the assistive technology. So that will plug in, either the assistive technology will directly interact with the MathJax itself, but if it can't, and it's something called ARIA aware, which you don't need to worry about if you don't know what that is, then it can use a fallback with MathJax provides. And this is not just screen readers and text-to-speech, but also electronic braille. So some VLEs will enable you to create pages which meet these requirements using LaTeX for the maths, for the equations, immediately straight out of the box, as long as it's configured correctly. So talk to your central learning and teaching team about that. So we can do that in Moodle. Okay, what if you're in Word? So again, you've got that one extra step. So first of all, you need your Word document to be accessible according to the Word accessibility checker. But then what it won't check for you, you need to ensure that you've written all mathematical text using Word 365 equation editor. And that includes even single letters. So a variable x, this is a piece of mathematical text. The variable theta, it's a piece of mathematical text. Don't use symbol insert, never write subscripts or superscripts or fractions using font or style changes or standard keyboard input alone. Never use an image of an equation. So I can just download the accessible Word format of this, which has been made all from the same master. And if I open that, so editing. Okay, so we can see I've got my contents page. If I just scroll down a bit, we can see this is the same document that we were looking at before. Now, how do I check it for accessibility? First of all, I might need to convert it if it's a slightly older version. And then if I go into review, I can check accessibility. Now, I didn't have to make this accessible because the way I generated it made it accessible for me. But I can also read aloud.
Check it is MathJax. Right click. X equals numerator, minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4amc end square root, end numerator, over 2am. Provides / enables.
Stop that. So those are the three things that you do basically to check your Word document. Is first of all, use the inbuilt accessibility checker, make sure your mathematical text is how it is, and then listen to it and it should read aloud correctly. There's a link there which takes you to some workshop resources I've made previously, which will take you through those steps in more detail. Okay. Accessible diagrams and interactive dynamic elements. I've been adding to this to try and kind of meet some of the questions that were coming up. So this is a long list. Interactive dynamic. So first of all, if it's a piece of software or another system like Numbast, then first of all, check with the vendor, the people that produce it, that it meets the WCAG 2.1 level AA requirements, and get your university to procure on that basis. Don't do the hard work. Get the other people to do it for you. Okay. Check the mathematics is rendered via MathJax, because that won't be covered in that accessibility check. So that's other pieces of software. Get them to do the work. Then you can use it knowing you're producing something accessible. If you're using video, you do need to add subtitles or closed captions. Now, we're not all in a happy place the Open University is. We don't have a team of people who do this for us. So the best way we found of doing it without procuring anything is upload to YouTube, wait for automatic captions to be provided, download those as a transcript, correct those in a text editor, upload them again, get YouTube to sync back, and then download as subtitles and add that to your video as a subtitle track, or you can just embed from YouTube. It's actually pretty good, even with mathematical content. You're going to have to do some punctuation, and there'll be mathematical terminology you'll want to capitalize or not capitalize or correct the spelling of, but it actually does a fairly good job. To me, handwriting is an interactive or dynamic element. It's not something we should be scanning and making into a fixed document that isn't accessible. But handwriting is an important thing in mathematics, and if we never do any handwriting, it's going to make it less accessible for the majority of people. So if you treat it as an interactive and dynamic element on top of a spine of accessible content, where anything you're handwriting is somewhere else in an accessible format, then I'm not a lawyer, but I suspect that's within the law. But you want to check with your institution on their take on that. My take is don't avoid using something if it currently can't be made technically accessible, but is important for other sorts of access. So handwriting isn't, GeoGebra is not fully accessible, but these are really great, like things for other disabled students. Someone who's dyslexic will find a handwritten video kind of going through something, or a GeoGebra applet which is dynamic, much more accessible than the print. So provide an alternative way to access the same content or experience that you're providing with that dynamic or interactive thing, whatever it is. So for instance, if you've got that spine of accessible materials, remove the proof from it and then go and handwrite that proof in and talk aloud and add to it, but make sure you're saying, you know, I'm on line, you know, this is the proof of theorem 2.1 and we're currently on line 2 of it. So that if someone is using a screen reader, they can follow along on the accessible full materials and they know what you're doing. The important thing the law does say is that you have to tell people what is and isn't accessible and who to contact if there's a problem, and you have to know what you will do when they contact you. We do have some fully accessible dynamic interactive tools. One of them is Desmos, which a lot of work has gone into to make that accessible. I have no idea how I'm going for time. Kevin, feel free to tell me.
We're going badly for time.
Badly. Am I over?
Slightly, shall we say? Shall we be diplomatic?
Yeah, okay. I won't demonstrate that, but we can get that read aloud in effect as a graph. We can hear it, and it can also be brailled automatically by the student. If you're a specialist in R, then the Braille R package can be used to make some sorts of graphs automatically accessible. If you've created the diagram from code or data, provide that code or data so the student can use that themselves. For all other diagrams, you will need to do some training, and there are links there for how you will do that. I've also put a note in that about some mathematical diagrams, it's the wrong thing to do to try and produce a lengthy textual description. And actually the right thing to do is say, actually, you need to have a one-to-one meeting with me if you can't see this, and we'll go through it or whatever. Okay, my final bit, and this is very quick. The elephant in the room, what about LaTeX? So the past, where we're trying to move on from at Bath now, is using tools which may or may not work, that cannot tell us why something doesn't work, and that in general can't possibly convert LaTeX. We were using those because we didn't have any other choice. So try not to fall back onto those. I've linked to the one that we currently use, but I don't suggest it. The future might be things like LWARP, which is a LaTeX package, which a lot of work has gone into, which will make HTML as output, and I think possibly EPUB, though I haven't tried it. The documentation currently runs to 1,237 pages though, and whether it will work will depend on what you're doing in LaTeX, and you'll have to work that out for yourself and test accessibility for yourself. The easiest method right now is to use R Markdown or Bookdown, incorporating LaTeX for the equations and a simple markup language for the rest. This resource has been made using actually Bookdown, which gives you things like theorems, theorem environments, and also numbering. And we are writing something at Bath to try and kind of go on top of Bookdown, which gives you access to things like new theorem types and theorem type sharing numbering, so fixing some of the things that Bookdown hasn't dealt with. What does this look like if you're actually doing it? So this is what my source of my presentation or document looks like, and one button press, I'm able to produce Gitbook, which is what you were looking at to start off with, a flatter Word HTML document, which is better for some people, Word, PDF in various formats, and EPUB, and you can explore those in your own time. And I think at that point I will say that I am done, and thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so we've got, we don't have much time for questions, but there are a load of questions, so maybe you're going to have to do a lot of typing up. But, I'm
happy to answer them via typing, so you can move on with time if that's better. Yeah,
and I should have said what people should preface the question by typing @ and the name of the speaker. So there are well, there's a lot of questions about LaTeX, and that's the one thing you didn't say much about. Well, I suppose you did say something about MathJax. But somebody does say, how many of these issues can be mitigated by providing the LaTeX source alongside a PDF? If you just give the LaTeX source.
Mm-hmm. Can you render LaTeX in your head without ever rendering it to PDF? Because that's effectively what you're asking someone to do if they're blind. I can do that. I think most people find that hard.
No, I think the thing is that if you give them the LaTeX, then they can perhaps have their own way of doing things.
Yeah.
Yeah?
So
should we be providing as
provide them with the full training and the tools in order to do that? But what I'm saying right now is actually the tools are really hard to use, and I think that would be putting quite a large barrier in front of a student who already has other barriers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking more of a sort of like an extra, just
yeah, sure,
some sort of help, you know.
Yeah.
A good thing to do.
Yeah, provide as many formats as you can.
Right, and here's the one I was thinking I'd like to know about. So, tips for how to make graphs, especially for statistical data analysis, more accessible. Do you just have to provide the sort of like a written description? Yeah.
The best thing for statistical graphs is to use the Braille package, or in fact actually just do everything in R and then provide the R source to the student and make sure they know how to use Braille R. So Braille R is developed by a group of blind statisticians, and it produces interactive descriptions and sometimes graphical interactive things with kind of structural descriptions. Also, it plugs that person into a community of blind statisticians, peers, that they can learn from. So if you actually genuinely have a student who is a screen reader user and you are doing statistics, which is beyond Excel, then that would be the right way of doing it. And the contact for that is Jonathan Godfrey, who is in New Zealand, and he's kind of the world specialist on that, and he's a blind statistician.
Okay, good. Hopefully somebody will stick that name in the chat for us. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I think we should be moving on, and perhaps you'll be able to answer some questions during the next talk.
Yeah, I'll keep typing.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. So now, this time, it's definitely Ben, isn't it? Ben Mestel. Yeah, are you ready?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Good. So Ben Mestel is a senior lecturer in the School of Maths and Stats at the Open University in Milton Keynes. His principal teaching role is Director of the Mathematics MSc program. Before coming to the OU, he taught at Exeter and Stirling universities and is a former Deputy Director of the Isaac Newton Institute for Mathematical Sciences in Cambridge. And the talk title is Sustaining a Community of Online Learners, Case Study from the Open University's MSc in Mathematics. So please tell us all about it, Ben.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen and start the video. The first thing I'm going to say is a take-home message, which is I was brought up by my mother, who had a book on her shelf by Dr. Benjamin Spock, a famous book from the 1950s on baby care. And the first opening lines are trust yourself, you know more than you think you do. And I think that's my message, my take-home message to everybody who's going to do online teaching, perhaps for the first time. Really do not worry about it. I've done a lot of online teaching over the years. I've done a lot of online lectures. And I have to say there are two things I have stopped doing. One is I don't use videos. You notice you don't see a picture of me. It simply uses up bandwidth and is a distraction for all, especially me. And the second thing is I don't really have very whizzy slides either. Obviously, I put the mathematics on when I need to, and I annotate. I have a tool for that, of course, when I need to. But I don't do too many things when I give online talks. And I think probably if you're going to be thrown in the deep end, as many people are going to be this coming autumn, if not already, then I would suggest you go down the more is less route. So let me now move on to my first slide. Okay, so I'll just tell you a little bit about the Open University's MSc program. The Open University is a distance learning university in the UK. Actually, the master's program in mathematics is very long standing, since the 1980s, and has about 400 plus students taking it. They normally take about 6 years, between 2 and 6 years, to complete 6 30 credit modules, largely 1 or 2 modules a year. And we have pathways in pure and applied mathematics, but not statistics. And the pathways culminate in a 30 credit dissertation, which is slightly unusual. Most MSc programs have more weighting to the dissertation than we do. But the important thing to appreciate is, unlike most of the Open University modules, which have very high, good module materials that have been polished, we in fact use very good textbooks and write wraparound notes and exercises to a set book, and that's the modus operandi for the MSc program, and it's worked very successfully for many years. Of course, the support is largely down to our network of specialist tutors and academic staff, and we also have, well, in principle anyway, twice yearly face-to-face weekends, one organised by the school and one organised by the Student Mathematical Society. And our assessment is just 4 formative assignments, and we still do examinations in case that's something that you're considering abandoning. It's something that we, I think, feel very important to continue in some way. And our student group, well, they're great students, I have to say, and they're largely retired or professionals who are studying for interest, which I'll say more. And they're, of course, rightly quite demanding at times, and our age profile is, roughly speaking, from age 25 to, well, you name it. We had a student in her 90s, I think. So that's how our program is. It's not open access, by the way. We do expect people to have a 2-2 in mathematics or a 2-1 in another degree with a high mathematical content, but we do look at non-standard applicants. So there ends the advertisement for the OU Maths program, MSc Maths program. So I'm going to talk about community and the importance of community. I know it's a cliche to talk about the loneliness of the long distance learner. I don't know who came up with the phrase, but it is a truth. We are dealing with people who are distant and remote from us in many ways, and we have to bring them in. And we have to bring them in both collectively and individually. And dealing with this issue is something that most face-to-face universities have not had to deal with in the past, because the students have been there, hopefully at any rate, they've been attending classes, and if they haven't, well, there are mechanisms for catching up on them. But largely speaking, we don't know what our students are doing most of the time, and sometimes they're stuck, and sometimes they don't want to ask, they're embarrassed to ask, and we need to make sure that they're included. The other thing we need to do is build support networks. We don't have the library or the common room or the bar for students to collaborate and on exercises and things like that, and to discuss mathematics. We need to build those support networks, and that's part of the community that we build, are the support networks. We use our community to enhance and extend learning. As I say, most of our students are really motivated for sort of largely for non-career reasons, and we want to extend their interest and their understanding. And finally, some people need to ensure attendance for regulatory reasons, and we want to make sure no student is left behind. So I look on this as a sort of extension of the famous Reithian mission of the BBC to educate, to inform, to entertain. And we do exactly everything that's involved in that. We broaden mathematical horizons, we hold events, we hold lectures, we tell people about what's going on in the mathematical world. So, for example, we pointed to obituaries of John Conway and Robert May just recently. We inform, obviously, the things we have to tell students they need to know that we tell them about. We deal with their queries. Of course, there are lots of queries recently over the whole COVID-19 business. And we also tell them about career-related things and all the stuff we have to do. But we also entertain, and this is all the sort of thing that I'm sure you do in your universities already. But our entertainment online is slightly different, I think. But we do things like, we have put on talks of general interest, both research talks and more undergraduate level courses, talks. And we've also pointed people to May Day madrigals, in which one of our colleagues participated, and indeed pub quizzes and things like that, though that wasn't done online. We also consult, and this is where we extend, I think, the Raytheon mission. We consult. We want to know what the students think of what we're doing, of our modules and of our structure. I personally have consulted students on our performance, which was in part good and part not so good in the postgraduate taught experience survey. And we consult and propose changes to the curriculum, that sort of thing. And we also listen to them, to their concerns, to their complaints, hopefully not formal complaints. Because students may not always be right, but they always are right to be heard. And we involve them in not just formally through the mechanisms that exist everywhere, but also through staff-student interactions and student-student interactions, which of course we are keen to foster. So we have a blended approach. We do have face-to-face things, at least hitherto we have, online events. We use social media, although I counsel against using social media actually too much, for reasons I'll go into in a moment. We use traditional forums a lot, and I don't apologize for that. I think that's an excellent way of building a community. I know they've been used for 20 odd years in universities as a way of delivering materials for students and things and answering queries, but the traditional forums are actually a great thing. And of course, because we're dealing with students who are remote, we deal a lot in email and telephone support, and our network of tutors do that. The OU has a diverse student community, and we had this excellent talk about accessibility just a minute ago, but our community is slightly more diverse than you might think. Of course, we deal with people who are in secure environments, which is largely prisons, who don't have access to, or have limited access to the computer and let alone the internet. But we also have a large number of students who have disabilities of a psychiatric nature or who are autistic, and they provide a very much a different challenge, especially when we're talking about community, because we want to involve them as well in our community as much as we can. Mindful of the time, we use Moodle forums and we have a very high student participation of all sorts. We have forums, obviously, that are dedicated to the maths teaching and the actual modules, but we also have forums that are dedicated to more general topics. And we have high student participation, both active and passive. Moderation, we find, is actually essential, but moderation isn't moderation in the sense of trying to control what's said, although there are occasions where that needs to be done. But it's actually to encourage student participation and to answer any queries that students might have. Our module forums are augmented by this postgraduate cafe I'll go into in a moment. But any essential communication, something the students need to know, we have to do via some form of internet briefing or email if necessary to ensure every student gets the message. Oh, by the way, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. I think that dates me a little. After all, that's from the 60s. And I would say that we have to be mindful of a number of things. One is, of course, it's age-related cultural references, such as that, or indeed sort of cultural references that not every student would be familiar with if they happen to be not from the United Kingdom. And of course, there's always the danger of misusing humor, which I'm sure we all know about with regard to the internet. So we're mindful of that when we try and build a community to make sure we're inclusive. So here's our postgraduate cafe. I chose this because this was the list of topics that we had open. And of course, it's not very interesting this week because people are focused on the assessments that are coming up, because we decided to go ahead with our examinations, although they're going to be remote examinations in which students have 24 hours to download, complete, and upload their answers. Which is quite a stressful thing to do, actually, especially if you're under lockdown, whatever the situation that pertains in a week or two's time is. But this is the sort of things that we do. We have our standing things that we for example, we're trying to get students to get more involved in the library and related to employability issues. And of course, we're failing miserably because students rightly are interested in what it concerns them. And most of our students are not interested in using our library facilities, excellent though they are, and they're not interested in career-related things. Some are, but most aren't. But we feel obliged to provide this option for them. Very keen thing the students are to introduce themselves, which can sometimes be difficult because some students do give too much information. I can say they've tried, partly because some people have, had a lot of adversity and have got to where they are through coping with that adversity, and they want to share it. But when you have a forum that's potentially open to 175,000 people, one has to be a little bit mindful about how much personal information people should share. But largely, the topics we deal with are all, as I say, they vary from. Here you see a colleague posed a post to do with the recent breakthrough by Lisa Picrilla in knot theory and Conway's knot problem. And here's something I posted, and of course I'm using this shamelessly to advertise. We did advertise the opportunities that might be coming up in a few weeks' time for tutor vacancies for the OU. And since I've got you here as a captive audience, I might as well also advertise that opportunity to you. Please go to the Open University website and register an interest if you're interested. Unfortunately, it's only open to people who are resident in the UK or the Republic of Ireland, but otherwise it's open to all mathematicians.
Sorry, Ben, were you showing a slide there that had something on? Because I'm still seeing Postgraduate Cafe.
That's correct. I haven't moved on from there.
Oh, right,
now,
right.
Here are my top tips. I won't go for much longer, actually, because I'm conscious it's the end of the day. So there's nothing new under the sun. Everything I say, you can work it out for yourself. I mean, for once, there isn't anything particularly, any technical thing that I'm going to say that's important here. Only that in building up a community, it's essential to be personal with people. We at the OU, we use first name terms. Our Vice Chancellor signs his emails, Tim. So we are very personal, and I recommend that as a way of building up community. Always polite, absolutely always polite under all circumstances, and patient too, because after all, you can never be sure whether the question the student is asking for the umpteenth time, is actually they've actually had access to the answer you've given before. So patience is essential. I recommend an informal style, an authoritative style, and honesty. And you'll see honesty is an important feature of the way we approach things. I believe that one should be proactive and reactive. In other words, we do actually put forward topics for students to discuss, as well as react to the topics that students want to raise, but always occupy the high ground. I really counsel you not to get involved in anything that is like the flame wars that used to take place in the 1980s and 90s. Always occupy the high ground. Moderation, as I mentioned, it's essential, but it has to be timely. That's the other thing. It's no use waiting for a week. Students need the answer now. So in fact, monitoring the forums on a daily basis is essential. Building community is hard work. It requires persistence, but it's rewarding. And perhaps I'll just finish. This is not actually my last slide. It's my penultimate slide. It was the last slide of a briefing that I gave to the whole MSc student group, and this which was originally planned in January before the whole COVID crisis came upon us, but metamorphosed into a briefing principally about our contingency planning for COVID. It had a very high student participation rate, as you can imagine, and it was very successful. This wonderful rainbow, by the way, I got from a community group in Leeds, used with their permission, by the way. I just wanted to finish now with this slide, which is, I'll leave it for you to read. It's indicating the reward that comes from a very large amount of hard work, not just by me, but by the whole team over a number of years, my predecessor too, building up the trust with our student group. And this was the student response. I didn't make this up. I didn't particularly select it, actually. It just was the right ones. But it shows you that by focusing on a student-focused approach, student-centered approach, treating students as people, not as commodities, as we so often have to do sometimes in university, it seems, but treating them as people has many, many benefits, and this is the reward that we get. So I'll just stop there. I wanted to give a very relaxed and upbeat talk, and I hope you found it useful in some ways. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, so we'll plow straight into the questions. Okay, so there was one in particular I'd spotted that said, Ben, how do you foster active participation in Moodle forums?
Okay, so Moodle forums. Well, first of all, we use Moodle because that's the university system, but also it's fantastic for mathematics. I think, in my view, you can really do well communicating mathematics via the Moodle forum. But how do you foster participation? The answer is that well, first of all, I pose questions. My questions tend to be more of a sort of whole MSc issue. So they rarely deal with actual mathematics, the questions I pose, but sometimes we do actually pose mathematical problems and for people to think about. So that's one way to be proactive in putting things forward for students to discuss. We consult students. That actually generates a lot of feedback from students. If we're proposing to make any changes to the curriculum, we ask them what they think, and we take note of what they say, which is one way of building trust. But let me tell you a truth. I've taught online for many years now, for over 12 years. And if I had a magic wand that could get students to speak during online tutorials and I could wave it, I would wave it for all of you, because I have not found that magic wand.
Right. Okay, yeah.
That's the truth.
We could all do with that magic wand, couldn't we? So, okay, so maybe we could answer this question. Could you say a little bit about how well student feedback is on Postgraduate Cafe?
Student feedback in what sense?
Cafe. Well, what do they think of it?
Oh, they love it. Yeah. I mean, the truth is that it's a great forum for them to discuss anything they want. Not just mostly things to do with mathematics, but occasionally it ventures elsewhere. We had some discussion about COVID-19 and about mathematical modeling within COVID-19, and we pointed them to various online talks that we held, principally at Oxford, for example. So there's been a lot of positive feedback from students about the forums, and it has a high participation rate. That having been said, there are students who study at the OU precisely so they don't have to interact with people too much, and they don't participate. And I think we have to be tolerant of that. That's part of being a community, is to accept that some people don't want to be part of the active community. As long as they're not left behind, that's fine.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. Okay, I think we should draw to a close there, because it's getting close to when we're going to finish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Michael. Michael Grove is going to bring together the threads of today, and then after that I'll just say something about what's going to happen about the links, etc., for tomorrow, what's going on tomorrow. Okay, so Michael.
Thanks, Kevin. Firstly, I think thanks to all of our speakers, to Rob, Katie, George, Mina, Emma, and lastly there, Ben, for I think some really quite thought-provoking ideas that have come through. I mean, what I'm going to do is I've kind of identified a few themes that I think are flagged, and I think there's a few things that we can all think about. But it was interesting to hear that a couple of speakers talk about this as an opportunity to do something, to change our approach to teaching, and to kind of really think about what we're trying to teach and how we might want to do that. And I think it was interesting that we said a bit about assessment, and I think George's session there was fantastic at kind of showing us how you can actually use the sort of the quiz and the assessment style to help deliver content and sort of guide students through the structure. But Katie's comments around thinking about assessment when we're designing our courses, I think we perhaps want to think a little bit more broadly and actually start thinking about, why are we assessing in the way that we do? Do we really need to assess to the same level? I think we've all kind of found the challenges adapting to online assessment. So this is perhaps an opportunity to kind of really think about what we're assessing and why we're doing that within our courses. Katie, again, I think mentioned some really good points about having this sort of spine of content, which I thought was a nice kind of way of looking at this. But I was really kind of struck by some of Rob's comments about actually the real need to help the students understand what this structure is, but also to kind of make clear their expectations, you know, within this process in terms of getting the students to engage with some of the materials. That actually kind of when we tried to move things online, the uptake was not possibly as great as we might have thought that that it would be. And I think, you know, the questions now of how we engage students online are probably mirrored by some of the conversations that we've always had about how do we engage students with, you know, with the learning experience. And I think there was a nice example of when Rob was saying he'd kind of used previous lecture recordings, there was limited uptake. But Katie, I think, showed us that if you design the videos in a certain way, you actually get quite intense use by students. A few of the comments I thought that are really important around the peer support and the community aspect. That I think one of the things that is really vital to how we've always taught mathematics is how we build that community of students. And I think there's a lot of evidence and certainly things that I've looked at with other colleagues around, you know, replicating the support mechanisms. There was the great workshop that was organised by Coventry Sigma last week on how you move mathematics support online. But we know students get a lot from the informal conversations that they have with other students, and they count that as some of the best feedback. So how actually do we ensure that students are not isolated and remain, you know, on their own? I think the pedagogy has to come into this, and I think we can couple that with technology. That Ben and Mine were talking about phrases less is more, and I think there's always that chance to want to try and do some fantastic you know, new innovation, but for many of us we're actually thinking, how do we just make that transition to delivering online first? And I think one thing we have to think about is not necessarily letting the technology drive that, is to think about, you know, what are the pedagogic things that we want to convey, and then what is the best technology to use. And I thought Mine gave us a fantastic overview of different ways of doing this, and Katie's approach around using videos as well. Emma's points, I think, were absolutely vital around accessibility, that really that is something that we have to consider. And I think any new content that we now produce has to meet those accessibility standards. We're not just reusing things from previously. And I think there's an argument that if we make things accessible for all, you know, for certain groups of students, we actually benefit the whole cohort by looking at how we make more of our material available. And I thought there's some really nice tips that I took around there from Emma's talk around how you can get subtitles on your videos through uploading things into YouTube. And then my final comments are really around the role of students within this process. That, you know, often I think we can focus upon how we're going to deliver the courses online. But Mine raised the idea of the student learner environment, that actually, you know, we're perhaps quite well kitted out in terms of the technology that we have access to, the facilities in which we can engage in this kind of interaction. But for many of our students, that isn't the case. They're watching the kind of the videos through their phones. They may not have their own kind of study spaces at home. They may have family circumstances that mean they can't participate in real time. So actually, I think there's a lot there that we have to think about. And then genuinely, the final comment is how we might draw students into helping us design some of our teaching. That actually, you know, how we can get some of those student views to help us shape the ideas and the approaches that we've got. You know, George showed some really nice data that he got on the impact that his online course had at bringing students up to a similar sort of standard. That's one way, but also how do we design our courses to take into account feedback from students about how they feel that they learn best? Because, you know, for some students, they may not be comfortable making that transition into being delivered online, which is why they choose the courses that they do. So I think we have to accept students have different ways of wanting to learn as well. So those were the things that I pulled out. I think final comment is really to say thank you to Rachel and Kevin for the job that they've done in pulling all of this together. Kevin didn't actually quite tell the truth when he said it was 4 weeks. It was less than 4 weeks between this being an idea and kind of coming to fruition. And I think, you know, it's full credit to Kevin and Rachel for all their hard work in making this happen. So I think they certainly deserve a round of applause in this process as well.
Well, I think you do as well. Come on, Michael. Come on. You make it sound as though you just sat around doing nothing.
I'd like to sit around doing nothing, but that's rarely the case, Kevin. But I think people have heard enough from me. And over to your smiling face.
They've probably heard even more from me. Well, anyway, yes, so all I wanted to say was thank you all very much for coming. I'm going to send round as soon as possible the link for tomorrow's session. We've got, again, 6 speakers, all nicely divided up, so we've got plenty of breaks so that we don't get too tired. But obviously, it is quite a long day. But we're starting off at 9:30, which John Mayer is going to be talking about. Well, I think what he effectively did was he had to transfer everything online very, very quickly. So I think that's what he's talking about. So I hope you can all join us tomorrow. So please join us if you can. So, okay, well, goodbye. See you later. Thank you. Right, no, I'll have to start stopping. I'll stop the live stream.